Chapter 698. This time, Xiao Xian and Duo Kang brought a total of 200 people, so they couldn't bring any more. There was also a drumming tribesman in the group, Qing Yi. Back then, he was only an intermediate totemic warrior, but now he was an advanced totemic warrior. Qing Yi often brought groups out to trade, so he was one of the more experienced people in the drumming tribe. Qing Yi's eyes were also brown. In the drumming tribe, people with brown eyes had a gentle temperament and weren't easily irritable or rash. This time, Qing Yi took the initiative to ask Xiao Xian if he wanted to go with them. He had brought groups to the Pu tribe many times before to trade, but in terms of long journeys, it didn't count. Compared to the long journeys of other tribes, it was like a joke. So this time, when Qing Yi saw that Yanjiao was going on another long journey, he requested to go with them to broaden his horizons. If there were no accidents, Qing Yi would already be the next chief. When Fan Mu stepped down, Qing Yi would take over. No matter what, the next chief of a tribe should have broader horizons, but the drumming tribe's range of activities was too small. They only knew about many things after the Flaming River trading point was built, and it was only limited to hearsay. Therefore, Qing Yi wanted to take this opportunity to go out and take a look, to see what a real long journey was like. He didn't expect that Yanjiao's journey this time would be even further than the other tribes. Not only did Qing Yi not give up, he even looked forward to it. Yanjiao had a type of water sun stone that they got from the other side of the sea. If there was a chance, he wanted to see what was there. Xiao Xian didn't reject him. Qing Yi could control his temper and wouldn't be impulsive. He wouldn't say anything that needed to be kept a secret. When Xiao Xian brought his people to the Longboat tribe, a long stretch of the river that flowed through the Longboat tribe was blocked. However, there weren't many long journeys that way, so Xiao Xian didn't see any boats that were blocked. When he heard that the Yanjiao people had finally arrived, the chief of the Longboat tribe, Mu Fa, quickly walked out of the tribe. "You're finally here." He had received a letter from Yanjiao a long time ago and was eager to make all the preparations. In order to protect the ship, they even sealed off the river. Before they merged with the Fire Seed, they had agreed to Yanjiao's conditions. This time, Yanjiao's people were going out to sea. This was exactly what the Longboat tribe wanted. They had been looking forward to this day for a long, long time. Everything was ready. After waiting for several days, they finally saw Yanjiao's ship coming over. "You guys are too slow," Mu Fa complained. "When are we leaving? We can set sail any time." Xiao Xian looked at the river. When he first came to the Longboat tribe, there were many large and small boats docked on the river in front of the Longboat tribe. Now, all the other boats had disappeared. Only 15 boats were docked there. 10 large boats and 5 small boats. Of course, that was only relative because the 5 small boats were the same size as the 2 that the Longboat tribe gave to Yanjiao. They should have been built in the same batch. Xiao Xian had suspected when the Longboat tribe gave the Longboat tribe their ships that the Longboat tribe might have greater ambitions and even hidden better things in the dark. Now, he finally saw it. The 10 large boats were twice the size of the boat that Xiao Xian and the others were on now. At first glance, it was obvious that they had been built not long ago and had never been used before. After the merging of the Fire Seed, the ambition of the Longboat tribe seemed to have been ignited. If Yanjiao hadn't proposed to go out to sea this time, the Longboat tribe might not have exposed the 10 boats so early. "What, are you scared?" Mu Fa saw the surprise in the eyes of the Yanjiao people and showed a smug look. "How many boats did you think we would take out?" "What? Small boats? Are you kidding? Are you sure you want to go out to sea and not go out to play? You think there are only 10 boats? What? Are you looking down on the Longboat tribe? Since when did the Longboat tribe only send out 10 ships for long trips?" Xiao Xian went on a tour of the boat while Mu Fa was chatting with Duo Kang and the others. The internal structure was similar to the 2 boats that the Longboat tribe gave them. The boats were designed with watertight compartments, and the masts and sails were also improved. It was more suitable for sailing in stormy areas. No one would have thought that an inland tribe had been thinking about how to go out to sea. Because they were in a hurry to go out to sea, the longboat tribe was led by Chief Mu-Fa himself. Without the fire seed, they could leave the tribe for a longer period of time without worrying about their strength deteriorating. There were nearly 300 people from the longboat tribe on this trip with Mu-Fa. On average, there were only about 20 people on each boat. 20 people could control a large boat very well. Rowing with manpower? If there was a need, weren't there still Yanjia people? The boat was already filled with supplies, enough for them to travel for a long time. The longboat tribe didn't have as much jerky made from fearsome beast meat as Yanjiao, but they had other substitutes. For example, they had some grains that were unique to their tribe. They never traded them and only kept them for themselves. Every year, the expedition team would bring some with them. For this trip, because they didn't have much time to prepare, they bought a lot of other food that could be stored for a long time from other tribes. Not only were the longboat people anxious, but the Yanjiao people also didn't want to delay. Therefore, after staying in the longboat tribe for a night of rest, the team set off early the next morning. The longboat tribe's boat was in front. They were familiar with the waterways and led the way. Among the people on the trip, Xiao Xian saw a few familiar faces, such as Mu Yu. The longboat tribe spent most of their time on the boat, running along the rivers. They also had to have the necessary knowledge. Observing the weather was a skill that many crew members had to learn. They could judge the weather early and make preparations in advance to reduce losses. Mu Yu was an elder of the longboat tribe and was considered an expert in observing the weather. However, Mu Yu didn't dare to look directly at Xiao Xian. When he was looking for the green-faced fanged beast in the fearsome beast forest, Mu Yu had been slapped in the face by Xiao Xian. Now that the two tribes were working together, Mu Yu wouldn't directly show his displeasure. He just looked awkward and tried to avoid contact with Xiao Xian. As soon as he saw Xiao Xian, Mu Yu would remember how he was slapped in the face. He was an expert in observing the weather, but he was wrong. The most embarrassing thing was that most people chose to believe Xiao Xian and not him. Fortunately, not many people knew about this. Xiao Xian asked the longboat tribe for another boat. They didn't have a big boat, but the longboat tribe still had a lot of smaller boats. Because they were in a hurry to go out to sea, Mu-Fa didn't hesitate this time and readily agreed. In order to make up a round number, he directly transferred 2 more boats. Although they were used, there were no quality problems. The longboat tribe still attached great importance to the maintenance of boats. 20 boats, in this place where boats were rare, was not a small scale. Especially the 10 boats at the front, they were quite eye-catching. Everywhere they passed, there were always many people who stopped to watch. They waited until the 20 boats left and couldn't be seen anymore before they retracted their gazes. Shipbuilding also required talent. Why didn't the longboat tribe's boats sink easily? This involved a lot of secrets. Even if someone copied and made the same shape, they wouldn't be able to make the same quality. Moreover, the longboat tribe used some new bronze that they bought from Yanjiao at a high price. They couldn't get the new bronze, and Yanjiao wasn't stupid enough to tell them the secrets of the new bronze. The longboat ships were also needed by Yanjiao, so there was such a mutually beneficial deal. The longboat tribe would rather use stone tools than skimp on the boat. Therefore, the quality of these 20 boats was also trusted by Xiao Xian. If there was anyone who could make the most reliable sailing boats, it would be the longboat tribe. Of course, outsiders didn't know about this deal. Those who stood on the shore and watched the fleet at first thought that this was another big operation by the longboat tribe. However, those who paid closer attention realized that this wasn't the case. There were also Yanjiao people among them. How did they know Yanjiao people? Yanjiao had become famous on this continent for a while because of the trading zone and the king beast. Now, many people knew about Yanjiao's flame totem symbol. The fleet followed the waterway led by the longboat tribe and arrived at the grassland. The grassland was very large. If it weren't for the longboat tribe's guidance, Xiao Xian wouldn't have known that there was such a waterway. This was a route that Xiao Xian and the others had never taken before. As they sailed forward, Xiao Xian perfected the map. The further they went, the more doubts Xiao Xian had. The tribes living on both sides of the river seemed to be used to the longboat tribe's behavior. At most, they were amazed by the longboat tribe's shipbuilding skills. When they could only use canoes or rafts, the longboat tribe could already build boats that were many times bigger than their tribe's largest tent. Other than having to use more strength to go against the current, they didn't encounter any big obstacles along the way. First, there were very few giant beasts in the river. Second, the tribes living here were very familiar with the longboat tribe and didn't want to provoke the longboat tribe. When they reached the end of the grassland, Xiao Xian saw the people of the Hui tribe. When Xiao Xian set off from the tribe, he asked Cha Cha to bring a message to the Hui tribe. Now Cha Cha was waiting here with the Hui tribe. A few people from the longboat tribe would follow them in case they encountered other giant mountain eagles. With the Hui tribe, it was slightly safer to avoid the attack of the giant mountain eagles. The river meandered through the mountains. Xiao Xian asked Mu Fa, was there really such a route from the longboat to the grassland and then past these mountains? Mu Fa paused and looked at the direction of the river in front of him. It was as if he could see through time and space. Of course there wasn't. The reason why it can flow through is because the longboat tribe drove it ourselves. Otherwise, how could it be so smooth? What do you think the longboat tribe's fleet goes to do every year? Mu Fa said meaningfully. Many rivers originally didn't intersect, but because of the longboat tribe, they intersected and connected. Connecting the most suitable rivers and exploring the most suitable waterways. The longboat tribe planned all of this. Human power created this route to the sea. Chapter 699. No matter how unhappy he was with the longboat tribe in the past, Xiao Xian had to admit that the longboat tribe was indeed admirable. So your ancestors had been planning this for a long time. It's a pity that we didn't realize it. Someone from the Hui tribe exclaimed. No matter how shocked and astonished they were, when the river finally flowed into the sea, all their emotions changed. The others were fine, but the longboat tribe became excited. It was as if they had awakened another personality in their hearts. This is the feeling of the sea. Mu Fa looked at the boundless sea and closed his eyes to feel the rise and fall of the boat in the waves. He took a deep breath and slowly opened his eyes to look at the horizon. At this moment, not only Mu Fa, but the other longboat tribe members also had the same feeling. The pride and excitement in their hearts suddenly seemed to be magnified countless times. They had entered the sea, they had really entered the sea. Among them, some had seen the sea before. When they went to the desert, they had also seen it, but they had never really taken a boat into it. In the past, every time they saw the sea, they seemed to be able to hear a deep call from the boundless blue. Although the water here was not blue, if they went further, they would definitely see the vast blue that they had been hiding in their hearts and looking forward to all this time. Their hearts were filled with yearning and longing for a greater future, and endless courage and fighting spirit rose within them. In the past, although the longboat tribe was known as one of the largest tribes, when people talked about the longboat tribe, it was only the boat river fire and not the great things they had done. They seemed to have always been sailing along the river aimlessly. Some people thought that they were showing off their shipbuilding skills, some thought that they were just going on a long trip to trade, and some thought that the longboat tribe was looking for a target, but no one really knew what their purpose was. It seemed that they had nothing to do other than going on long trips to trade and going back and forth on the boat. Generation after generation, no one knew how many years had passed before the longboat tribe finally opened up this route. In the past, because of the fire seed, they could not go far and set foot on that vast land. But now, without restrictions, their opportunity had come. It was no longer a winding river, but a vast sea. To them, the vast sea in front of them was boundless, heroic, and so enchanting. They could not help but be ambitious and full of fighting spirit. The fire seed in their bodies seemed to be activated with the outburst of their emotions. The fire seed that had not completely merged began to condense and permeate into their blood. Whoosh! One by one, flames appeared on the bodies of the Longboat tribe members along with the totem patterns on their bodies. Their blood was boiling, and every cell in their bodies seemed to be screaming and roaring. Generations of the Longboat tribe's ambitions, at this moment, they were finally fully awakened. The glory that originated from their bloodline and the ambition that had awakened allowed them to not shrink back even in the face of the monstrous waves of the endless sea. Mu-Fa stood at the bow of the first ship and roared, "My longboat, keep going. Unstoppable. My great longboat will never stop moving forward. Unstoppable ours. Unstoppable. Our. Unstoppable." The 15 Longboat tribe members on the 15 ships roared, as if they wanted to release all their pent-up emotions. They were the first fleet to truly step into the sea, and the first Longboat tribe to cross the sea and set foot on another continent in thousands of years. Because they were sailing against the current, they had to use manpower to row the boats. That was why there were Yanjiao members on every ship. On one of the ships, Guang Yi looked at the excited Longboat tribe members and asked Duo Kong, "What's wrong with the Longboat tribe?" "Nothing, they're just crazy," Duo Kong replied. Guang Yi. "Oh." Not far from them, a Longboat tribe member turned to look at the calm Guang Yi and Duo Kong. He asked curiously, "Don't you feel excited?" Duo Kong shook his head. "No." That person choked for a moment and asked again, unwilling to give up, "Do you feel a burning passion that can't wait to roar out?" Duo Kang's face was expressionless, "No." The man looked at Duo Kong like he was an idiot, as if to say, "The warriors of the Longboat tribe have nothing in common with you mortals." Duo Kong pursed his lips, "What's there to be proud about crossing the sea on a boat? We followed the Grand Elder from the other continent. I didn't say it because I didn't want to scare you." The two sides looked at each other with disdain. After sailing on the sea for a period of time, the Longboat tribesmen's initial excitement had cooled down a little, but they were still occasionally crazy. Compared to the river, the sea was ever-changing. When it was calm, there was a peaceful atmosphere. Whether it was the Yanjiao or the Longboat tribe, they still had the mood to fish, watch the sunrise and sunset, chat and chat. When the weather suddenly changed, there was no shore to shelter from the wind and waves. They could only go head-on. On the vast sea, the fleet was pitifully small, isolated and without help, swaying with the wind and waves. Facing the majestic waves under the wind and rain, the Longboat tribe members seemed to be on steroids. They controlled the boats to prevent the boats from being overturned by the waves. At the same time, they shouted at the waves, "Forward! Attack!" Xiao Xian suddenly felt that the Longboat tribe members were no longer as calm as before. Instead, there was a strange aura of banditry. In the calm and angry waves, the fleet sailed towards their destination. When they were sailing on the sea, they would often detect huge sea beasts swimming under their fleet. Once, a fish that was almost as long as the 5 smaller ships behind them rushed out of the sea and jumped out of the water. The next moment, a huge beast with sharp teeth broke out of the water and bit the fish that jumped out, leaving only the tail outside. Then, the giant beast took its prey back into the deep sea. When the giant beast hunted for food, it would set off huge waves that almost overturned the boats. This happened more than once. Sometimes, they would retaliate and kill the fish that attacked the fleet. The weather was getting colder by the day. Snow had already begun to fall, but it was not heavy. Xiao Xian looked ahead with his binoculars. "There's land." When Mu-Fa heard this, he hurriedly took the binoculars from Xiao Xian and looked carefully. Then, he laughed and said, "We're here, we're here. We're finally here." There was land in front of them. From what they could see, it should be a mountainous area. They followed the universal eyes to find their way here, but they only had a vague idea of where it was. What they needed to do now was to follow the land and find a large river that entered the sea. They had agreed to meet the Taiha tribe at the estuary. But the current situation was that they could not pinpoint the exact location. They did not know which direction to go at this time. After all, no one knew where the river was. If they chose the wrong direction, they would waste more time. What do we do? Mu Fa looked at Xiao Xian. Wait. Xiao Xian left and used the knot divination to choose the direction. Fortunately, the knot was a success. After reading the conclusion, Xiao Xian pointed in a direction and told Mu Fa to let the fleet head there. Mu Fa looked at Xiao Xian, then at the other Yanjiao people. Seeing that they had no objections, he let the long boat fleet sail in that direction. After all, they had already achieved their goal of sailing to another land. They had already fulfilled their ancestors' wish. As for picking them up, that was something the Yanjiao should worry about. The long boat people did not care. However, before that, they had to go ashore to replenish their food and water. It would be best if they could stock up on some juicy fruits. Although the distribution of plants in the forest here was slightly different, there were still many familiar plants. Duo Kong and Guang Yi recognized them. They had never seen them on the other land. Now that they were back here, looking at the unique fruits on this land, Duo Kong was filled with emotions. I didn't expect to be back so soon. On the Longboat tribe's side, Mu Fa was the first to jump off the boat before it even stopped. He wanted to be the first person on the long boat to cross the sea and set foot on another land. Ignoring the maniacal laughter of the long boat people, Xiao Xian quickly ordered people to find food and water. After a short rest, they still had to set off. After resting for a night at the shore, the fleet set off again, heading in the direction Xiao Xian pointed out. They searched along the coastline. 2 days later, they finally saw a wide river flowing into the sea. Chapter 700. It's here, right? Duo Kong asked Xiao Xian as they got closer to the shore. It should be here. Let's land first, Xiao Xian said. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Duo Kong also called out to the other Yanjiao tribesmen. Prepare to land. When the first boat finally reached the shore, Mu Fa suddenly shouted, "Everyone, stop!" While everyone else was stunned by Mu Fa's sudden roar, Mu Fa leaped into the water. His face was still red from excitement as he stood in the cold water. After laughing out loud, he raised his head and said to the other longboat tribesmen on the boat, "Come down, all of you." Seeing this, Duo Kong despised him. Didn't he just want to be the first to land here? It was the same when they first landed 2 days ago. Mu Fa used the fact that he was the chief and wanted to be the first to do everything. This was because he was recorded in the history of the Longboat tribe as the first chief to lead a team into the sea, the first chief to successfully land on a foreign land, and the first to reach this place. What's this place called? Mu Fa suddenly remembered. He didn't know the name of this place. How would he record it down if he didn't know the name? How would he leave it for the future generations of the Longboat tribe? After hundreds and thousands of years, who would know where you'd landed? What if the future generations thought they were the first to discover this place? Crocodile River, Xiao Xian said. Duo Kong, Guang Yi and the others all looked at Xiao Xian in confusion. When did this name come up? How come they didn't know it was called Crocodile River? I just named it, Xiao Xian said calmly when he saw their confusion. Then he asked people to prepare a monument, just like at the Flaming River. Mu Fa thought it was a pity. If this river didn't have a name, he would imitate Yanjiao and give it a name. Longboat River, Mu Fa River and so on. He didn't expect Xiao Xian to name it on the spot. Mu Fa didn't want to argue with Xiao Xian. Plus, he was one step behind Yanjiao, so there was no need to argue. However, when he found a new place or a new river without a name, he would imitate the Yanjiao people and name it. Then he would put a monument with the totem of the Longboat tribe. He didn't believe there was only one river. Xiao Xian looked at the river in front of him. It was about the same size as the Flaming River. If this is the main river that passes through the forest, there should be crocodiles living in this river. However, it's winter now, so those crocodiles might be hiding or gathering in warmer parts of the river to spend the winter. Mu Fa nodded. He had been to the Flaming River trading point and saw the drumming tribesmen riding crocodiles from the drumming tribe to the trading point. That was why he knew what crocodiles Xiao Xian was talking about. Everyone be careful. Although those crocodiles might not be here right now, we still need to be vigilant. This is a forest full of fearsome beasts. Mu Fa warned the Longboat tribe warriors. After all, the Longboat tribe rarely came into contact with an environment like this, so they couldn't get used to it immediately. Some of them might even be careless in small details. If he didn't warn and pressure them, it would be too late for regrets if something happened. I once saw a huge crocodile in this river. That's the biggest threat. If you encounter it, retreat decisively. Run away from the river and the sea. Don't go to the boat. The boat's speed is far slower than the crocodiles. Could it be a king beast? As a drumming tribesman, Qing Yi was very interested in the crocodile Xiao Xian mentioned. No, it's not a king beast yet, but it should be close. Qing Yi thought for a moment and said to Xiao Xian, "There aren't any crocodiles around here, but I think there might be something I need in this river. I want to take a look." The drumming tribesmen were good at water, so Qing Yi didn't enter the water at the estuary. Instead, he walked upstream for a while. The people around him were chopping trees to build houses or hunting for food. If he met with an accident, he could ask for help in time. After confirming the location of the river, Qing Yi took a deep breath and jumped into the water. The drumming tribesmen didn't like winter and the cold river water, but in order to find what he wanted, Qing Yi couldn't care less. The totemic power in his body started to circulate. With the appearance of the totemic patterns, Qing Yi's skin started to thicken and the cold river water became less irritating. After fusing with the fire seed, he became more familiar with the usage of his power. Under the fire seed's influence, his totemic power became purer. Making water moon stones also trained his skills. In order to save as much energy as possible, he could use the power in his body to every place he needed to use it. He was very precise and didn't waste too much energy. Xiao Xian and Duo Kong discussed the layout of the camp. They didn't know when the Taiha tribe would arrive, so just in case, it was better to be prepared. They couldn't sleep on the boat forever. After winter, they didn't know if the sea near the coast would freeze. While waiting for the Taiha tribe, they still had to learn how to maintain the boat from the Longboat tribe. They also had to check and repair the boat often. Otherwise, after winter, the boat wouldn't be able to be used anymore. How could they go back? When building the camp, Xiao Xian also got some edible plants that couldn't be found on the other side of the sea. He also got some herbs that could be used to make medicine. He planned to bring them back when the time came. The herbs that didn't wither in winter were dug up and the withered ones that could be found as seeds were collected. Of course, if the seeds were too big, it wouldn't be convenient to bring them back. They could use methods like layering, cutting, or splitting. Maybe now wasn't the best time, but Xiao Xian had no choice. They couldn't stay here forever. While the Yinjiao people were collecting plants or catching animals suitable for breeding, the people on the Longboat tribe seemed to have come to their senses. Xiao Xian saw that Mu Fa couldn't stay idle all day. He brought people everywhere. This, and this. Dig them all up and bring them back. What's this? It's so ugly. Whatever, bring it back too. Wait, who's that? Where did you get this snake? Did you dig it out when you were digging for grass? I've never seen that pattern before. Bring it back too. What? The Yinjiao people said that it's highly poisonous? Forget it, let's just kill it and eat it. Other than the time spent building the camp, Mu Fa and the Longboat tribe followed the Yinjiao people to dig for herbs and catch animals. They didn't rest or feel tired. They were always in high spirits. After the campsite was built, the outer perimeter of the campsite was also surrounded by a circle of tall tree trunks, forming a wall that could prevent some unnecessary trouble. Yinjiao and the longboat tribe discussed and decided to use the trees here to build a new ship. This was planned before they set off, so Xiao Xian and the others also brought some new bronze, which was used to build ships. The longboat tribe's shipbuilding technology had been improving. After going to the sea and seeing the ocean environment, the longboat tribe people had more requirements for ships. Only by constantly improving the ship could they satisfy their ambitions. In the past, the wood used to build ships was carefully selected. They even let a few tribes rely on them to plant trees and then choose the best wood from those trees. However, those trees couldn't compare to the trees Yinjiao cut from the forest. This time, they mainly used the wood provided by Yinjiao. A lot of wood required a lot of materials to trade, but here, the best wood was ownerless. They could cut down whichever wood they liked, as long as they didn't provoke the hibernating beasts. Since the longboat tribe had better wood and the new bronze produced by Yinjiao, Mu Fa had to think more about this trip to the sea. They needed to let the longboat tribe truly start a new era and realize the dream that their ancestors had been looking forward to for generations. They needed to continuously modify and innovate the ship. Due to the limitations of wood, they had designed turreted ships. They built a multi-storied ship on the ship and used it as a warship or command ship. In addition, Mu Fa also planned to explore a fixed route and find a suitable place to be a port. Only then could they set up a large-scale sailing fleet. They wanted to develop the inland river fleet from the mainland into a truly strong sailing fleet. Their technology needed to be improved continuously. Anchors, sails, docks, paddle wheels. Mu Fa constantly thought about how to innovate and improve in his free time. This trip gave him a lot of inspiration. From time to time, he gathered a group of talented longboat people to discuss. Xiao Xian once took a look at Mu Fa's design. It was very simple. Xiao Xian didn't understand many of the labels. Perhaps it was because of this that Mu Fa let Xiao Xian take a look at it. But just from those things, Xiao Xian knew that the longboat people were indeed geniuses when it came to shipbuilding. In the near future, when the longboat tribe people learned more about sailing, they might be much more powerful than Xiao Xian thought. They would be more adapted to the ocean and river environment of this world and era. In fact, many civilizations that started with agriculture were more gentle. They weren't keen on expanding their territory. Instead, they were more inclined towards peace and a moderate mentality. They paid attention to inheritance and took care of things from generation to generation. They only wanted stability and stability. If they weren't provoked, they would rarely take the initiative to attack. Yinjiao, to a certain extent, was more inclined towards agriculture. Although there were hunting many wars in Yinjiao's history, they rarely took the initiative to attack. The difference was that even if the longboat tribe also farmed, they were more inclined towards sailing. Especially after the sea route was opened, they would develop in another direction. In terms of climate and environment, the sea was far more unpredictable than the land. Just as Mu Fa said, they had to constantly improve their ships and tools to ensure that they could survive on the ever-changing sea that contained great power. Following this, their temperament would also change. They would no longer be conservative and would become more outgoing. During this period of contact and observation, Xiao Xian discovered that the longboat tribe people had already begun to show signs of aggression. Of course, this wasn't towards Yinjiao, but towards those unknown places, as well as more people and lands that they were curious about. Great Elder Xiao Xian, look. Are these the water sun stones you were talking about? Qing Yi brought over a piece of crystal. During this time, he had found a lot of raw stones similar to the water sun stones in the river. Perhaps others might not be able to distinguish those stones from ordinary stones, but for the drumming tribe people, it was as simple as distinguishing between black and white. Xiao Xian took the stone, covered it with his hand and looked at it. He nodded and said, "Yes, this is it." Xiao Xian returned the crystal that had changed from a raw stone to a water sun stone to Qing Yi. He remembered something. There are a lot of metals here, but relatively speaking, there are very few beautiful crystals. So many crystals that have no practical use for us are very popular here. Those who don't lack food and have a slightly higher standard of living will choose some rare crystals to wear. This can show their uniqueness, especially the slave owners. The rarer the crystal, the more they like it, and the more it reflects their superior status. Hearing that the water sun stones could be sold at a high price here, Qing Yi's heart was suddenly excited, but soon he was disappointed. It's a pity that our drumming tribe is far from the coast and can't come here often. But the drumming tribe people didn't have much ambition. Qing Yi only felt a little regret for a moment and didn't care anymore. Instead, it was Mu Fa who was quite interested in this. When Qing Yi and Xiao Xian were talking, he had been eavesdropping. Because it didn't involve any secrets that couldn't be said, Xiao Xian didn't stop him from eavesdropping. Now, Qing Yi didn't say anything, but Mu Fa suddenly said, "Actually, you can make a deal with our longboat tribe." Water moon stones were found in many places on the other side of the continent, and there were even many glowing crystals similar to water moon stones. But now that he had encountered a tribe that produced water moon stones, Mu Fa wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Their longboat tribe would continue to travel between the two continents in the future. He even planned to open the first sea trading route. Perhaps this would become a thorn in the side of the slave owners, but the longboat people would absolutely not care. Not only would they not be restrained, they would be even more unscrupulous. The first sea trading route. Thinking about it, Mu Fa was so excited that he wanted to jump a few times. After the camp was built, the first new ship would also be built. The Yinjiao people were responsible for cutting down trees, the longboat people were responsible for building, and Yinjiao also had a share in the new ship. Xiao Xian wasn't afraid that the longboat people would play tricks on the ship. The longboat tribe temporarily couldn't handle the changing sea environment alone. They would continue to rely on Yinjiao's help. When they encountered difficult decisions, they would find Yinjiao to negotiate. They didn't want to act alone. They needed to exchange benefits with each other to achieve a win-win result. As for Qing Yi, he had offered to help, but in terms of strength, Qing Yi couldn't compare to the Yinjiao people. In terms of shipbuilding skills, he stopped at making wooden rafts and bamboo rafts. When Qing Yi offered to help, whether it was the Yinjiao people or the longboat people, they all laughed and said, "Go play on the side." Therefore, Qing Yi was now looking for those water sun stones in the river. After staying in this place for 15 days, Cha-Cha finally brought good news. Xiao Xian heard the eagle cry in the air and said, "The Taiha people are here." What? They're finally here? Duo Kong, who was carrying a piece of wood, threw it aside and ran in the direction Xiao Xian pointed. He hadn't seen his old neighbors for so long, and he wondered how they were doing. Chapter 701. When Xiao Xian saw the Taiha people, Zheng Luo, Guang Yi and the rest were already talking to their old neighbors. Looking at the state of the Taiha tribesmen, Xiao Xian realized that they looked even worse than when the flaming horns first migrated from the forest to the sea. Their clothes were torn and tattered with scratches from tree branches and beast bites. Even though they were wearing thick animal hides, he could still see dried blood and hideous wounds on their bodies. Migrating a tribe was not an easy task, but many times, in order for the tribe to survive and develop, they had to make some sacrifices. This was something that most tribes had experienced, regardless of their strength. Luckily, Xiao Xian noticed that although the Taiha people were in bad shape, most of them still made it here alive. "I've been worried that we've gone the wrong way. I didn't think we'd really make it." Fei Ang of Taiha was familiar with Tao Zheng and the rest. He didn't even rest when he saw them, panting and laughing as he walked over. Duo Kong was talking to the Taiha chief, Yu. He understood the current situation of the Taiha people and introduced the other unfamiliar faces in the Yinjiao team to them. He also introduced the people from the longboat. Guang Yi also started chatting with his old friend. After walking for so long, enduring the pressure brought by the uncertainty of their future, experiencing many difficulties and obstacles, the moment they finally saw an old acquaintance, the people of Taiha were so excited that they cried. Even the usually serious elders couldn't help but tear up. Guang Yi looked at his old friend and smiled brightly. Long time no see, Ji Peng. In front of Guang Yi, the person who was crying due to all kinds of complicated emotions held back his tears. His face was stiff as he pointed to the side. Ji Peng is over there, I'm Hui Ji. Guang Yi paused, then smiled warmly. Long time no see, Hui Ji. Guang Yi was still the same, he couldn't recognize people after a while. Hui Ji thought. Take care of the weak, especially the weak children and the injured who hadn't awakened their totemic power. They weren't like the others. Even if they made it here, even if their lives weren't in danger, they could still die if they weren't careful. After inquiring about the condition of the injured, Duo Kong came over to Xiao Xian and told him about Taiha's current situation. There were about 4,000 people in Taiha, and about 3,500 of them made it here alive. Nearly 500 people had been lost along the way. Part of it was because of the ferocious beasts in the forest and the various dangerous environments, and part of it was man-made. The first thing Duo Kong thought of was the green-faced fanged beast. Xiao Xian knew the green-faced fanged beast could help with forging because of Heng. There was no way the Xia slave masters wouldn't know about this. In the past, they might have thought that it didn't matter if they couldn't find it. They had weapons made by the Gongjia family that were much better than normal weapons. That was enough. But now that the two continents were getting closer, the threat was greater. Perhaps they had even suffered a great loss at the hands of Rock Hill City, so they were eager to find a solution. It's a good thing that it's winter now. Many beasts are hibernating. That's why they didn't suffer any losses. Duo Kong sighed. They had migrated before too, so they knew what it was like to move a tribe. It wasn't just physical fatigue, it was also psychological stress. Those who couldn't handle it would break down. But they prepared a lot of medicine. That's why most of the people who were poisoned or seriously injured didn't die. Take care of them. We've prepared a lot of prey. Let them recover as soon as possible. They won't be able to cross the sea if they're too weak, said Xiao Xian. Duo Kong understood that life on the sea wasn't easy. Without a strong body, it would be difficult to survive. If they fell sick again, their medicine would be used up and they wouldn't be able to replenish it. They could only wait for death. Perhaps it was because they saw hope, the huge pressure and anxiety in their hearts disappeared. After a good night's sleep, the Taiha people felt much better. Some slept even longer. They hadn't had a good rest in a long time. It was rare for them to have a relaxing environment, so they slept for a few days straight. When they woke up, they were full of energy again. Most of the people who had recovered started to look for herbs. They couldn't carry wood or build ships, but they could prepare some herbs. If they saw herbs that Yanjiao missed, they would dig them up. Are we going to take these boats and leave? Taiha's chief, Yu, looked at the big boats and asked Duo Kong. Yes, these are the boats. You haven't seen them before, right? Hee. Over here, even if there were boats, they weren't very big and couldn't compare to these. Perhaps the 6 noble families of the royal city were good at other things, but when it came to building ships, they couldn't compare to the people of the longboat tribe. Especially in the past few years, when many places were dry, there were even fewer people using boats. This surprised the Taiha people. They thought that the other side might be more backward. They heard that many tribes were still primitive and used stone tools. But now, it seemed that they were too naive. This is. Yu pointed at the green axe in Duo Kang's hand. This is a gold weapon? Duo Kong was even more proud. He had wanted to show off in front of his old neighbors for a long time. He spun the axe in his hand around his palm, then grabbed the handle and chopped at a rock on the side. Bang! With a crisp sound, a deep mark was left on the rock. Yu's jaw dropped. He looked at the axe in Duo Kang's hand and then at the stone that had been split open. He walked over in disbelief and tested the hardness of the stone. Unwilling to give up, he used his axe that was already missing 2 notches to hack at it again and again. Then, he cursed under his breath and turned to look at Duo Kong, his eyes shining. Is this the one you mentioned in the letter? That's right. Duo Kong said proudly. We call it New Bronze. Great Elder Xiao Xian named it. Because it was inconvenient to say too much in the letter, he only vaguely mentioned it in the letter to the Taiha tribe. He only told them not to worry about weapons and that Yanjiao had improved their gold weapons. It was definitely better than before. Before this, the people of Taiha had always been suspicious. After all, the Flaming Horn tribe did not have much talent in forging and farming back then. Their skills were limited, but they did not expect it to be true. There are many more things that will shock you. You will see them when it's over. Duo Kong was looking forward to seeing the Taiha people in the Yanjiao tribe today. Yanjiao was no longer what it used to be. The Taiha people would never expect this. Right, did you really build a city? Yu was very interested in this. Something like that. Zheng Luo said we don't have the same name as the slave masters. We'll call it City, Flaming River City. Flaming River? Really? Good. 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 Yu, the Taiha chief, exclaimed. Duo Kong was confused. Why are you so excited? Yanjiao named the river and named the trading point after it. What does it have to do with you? Why are you more excited than us? Flaming River, there's a river in it too. Ha ha ha. It feels so close. Good. Yu slapped Duo Kong again and again, putting on a good brother look. Duo Kong said. You're thinking too much. It's really because of a river. The snow here was not heavy in the winter. Only the sea near the coast had a thin layer of ice. Although the snow was not heavy, the wind was strong and it did not have a direction. As the days passed, most of the Taiha people had recovered. They helped out every day for their own sake. They prepared food, medicine, built new boats, and waited for the best time to leave. Chapter 702. Xiao Xian quickly knotted a rope in his hands. Duo Kong and Guang Yi stared at Xiao Xian, waiting for Xiao Xian to speak. Xiao Xian looked at the conclusion on the straw rope and relaxed. The day after tomorrow will do. It's a good day. Through the knot divination, Xiao Xian interpreted the result. The day after tomorrow was the best time to leave. Winter was ending soon. They couldn't really wait until winter was over. That would be too rushed. Many times, the beasts in the forest reacted faster than them. So, it was always good to be prepared. Then I'll go inform the Longboat tribe and Taiha tribe. Duo Kong got up excitedly and rushed out of the wooden house. He first went to find the chief of the Longboat tribe, Mu Fa. After all, they had to convince them to leave. The Longboat tribe was good at observing the weather. In the past, they were the ones making the decisions. But now, the Yanjiao people were more inclined towards Xiao Xian's decision. Even the Longboat tribe's Mu Yu, who was good at observing the weather, didn't say anything after knowing that it was Xiao Xian's decision. Then we'll leave the day after tomorrow. Tell everyone to get ready to leave. Mu Fa was also eager to return. After leaving Mu Fa's place, Duo Kong also went to Taiha to inform them of their decision. The campsite was bustling with activity. It was like a hibernating animal waking up from its slumber to stretch its limbs and prepare for a big fight. On the day of departure, the sky, which had been gloomy for a long time, suddenly cleared up. Although the moon couldn't be seen at night and winter hadn't officially passed, it was almost time. Moreover, the rare good weather made everyone feel as if winter had left early. Get ready to return. The ice on the coast had been broken in advance. The ships wouldn't be obstructed by the ice. The ice was thick too. Places further away from the coast or near the Crocodile River were not frozen. This wasn't a big threat. There were 25 ships. Each ship had more than 100 Taiha people. Some ships had more, some had fewer. There were 5 more ships, but it was still crowded. Other than the Taiha people, there were all kinds of supplies on the ships. Among the 25 ships, 5 of them looked different from the other 20 ships. These were 5 experimental ships made by Mu Fa and his top technicians after discussion. From the outside, it was obvious that they were more aggressive. The most obvious were the few projector windows used for shooting arrows and spears. They looked more aggressive too. Mu Fa didn't plan to use these 5 ships for a long time. The reason they were used as experimental ships was because of time and conditions constraints. The wood couldn't be treated to perfection. Due to lack of time and conditions. Usually, when they built ships made, they didn't use the wood. The wood was dried wood was dry. Was dry. But there wasn't a kiln. There wasn't a kiln. So was the wood was to dry was dry. Was s's was dry to's. Was s was for his. Was for dry was s was used was dry. It didn't look good, but it could be used. Of course, even if the wood was dried, due to the limited conditions, the amount of wood was too much. The drying effect was far from what Mu Fa wanted. However, the situation was different now. They were in a hurry to leave. They didn't have much time to dry the wood. Fortunately, these ships couldn't last long. They could still make it back. In the future, when they expanded their fleet and went out to sea again, they would find a suitable place to build a bigger camp and a large kiln to dry the wood. Mu Fa was full of energy. He just wanted to go back quickly and tell the longboat tribe about what happened here. They were only the first batch of people to explore. Compared to the previous longboat tribe expeditions, there were fewer people. But after this trip, things would be different. The longboat tribe would gradually shift their focus. They wouldn't quarrel with other tribes inland. They didn't have time for that. The longboat tribe would be the one to open up the trade route on the sea. Leaving this continent where their ancestors had lived for generations, the people of Taiha looked at the scenery in the distance and felt rather emotional. Of course, it was only a temporary feeling. Tribes like them who had merged with the fire seed had migrated many times throughout history. They would feel reluctant to leave a place, but it wouldn't be that strong. As long as they felt that the future would be better, that complicated feeling of reluctance would quickly fade away. With more people, they couldn't always rely on the supplies on the ships. As long as they had time, the people on the ships would try to catch some small fish from the water. Sometimes they used nets, sometimes they just fished. The medicine they made in advance also prevented some diseases from happening. Xiao Xian reminded Mu Fa of this when they went out to sea. Mu Fa was very grateful to Xiao Xian. After all, the longboat tribe's rich experience was limited to the rivers inland. The rivers and the sea were very different. Just like when they came, they encountered bad weather on the way back. Many of the Taiha tribesmen couldn't get used to it. After they got through it, they were depressed for a few days. They could only take medicine every day. Sometimes Qing Yi would go into the water. Even though the water was still cold, he had swum in frozen rivers and seas before they set off. He didn't care about the cold anymore. The only thing he had to be careful of were the dangerous creatures in the sea. Today, it was another sunny day. The sea was still calm. There were only gusts of weak wind blowing. Jiao, the eagle's cry in the sky surprised Xiao Xian, who was looking at the map. He took the binoculars and climbed to the observation platform on the mast to look into the distance. "What's going on?" asked Mu Fa. There was only one binoculars. No matter how good Mu Fa's eyesight was, it couldn't compare to the giant mountain eagle's binoculars. Xiao Xian looked into the distance. He didn't see any dangerous sea creatures, but he saw many pieces of ice. "There's a lot of ice in front. Be careful." They didn't see any icebergs. They didn't know where the ice came from. There were many of them, big and small. However, probably because they kept melting, the size of the ice didn't pose too much of a threat to the ship. Mu Fa asked the ship to slow down. When the ice floes got closer, he saw something in the ice. He took the net and scooped up the ice. After looking at it carefully, he saw that there was an insect in the ice. It looked like a beetle, about the size of a fist. He didn't know what kind of insect it was. He had never seen it before. If it was in the past, Mu-Fa wouldn't be interested in these beetles. However, it was different now. They found it in the sea. Who knew if it was something from the sea? It didn't look like it. How did you know it wasn't from the sea? Scoop it up. Scoop it up and bring it back to show the people in the tribe. After a pause, Mu-Fa thought of something and said to Xiao, "Don't fight with me." The Yinjiao people weren't interested at first, but seeing Mu-Fa like this, they became interested. Duo Kong pointed at the ice and shouted to the Yinjiao people, "Scoop up a few for us to see." Chapter 703. Seeing that Yinjiao was fishing, the longboat tribe moved even faster. The Taiha tribesmen heard the commotion and came out to see what was going on, even though they were exhausted. After a while, they even helped. The longboat tribe had many boats, but the Taiha tribesmen were definitely helping Yinjiao. Seeing so many Taiha tribesmen helping Yinjiao, Mu-Fa was furious. The Taiha tribesmen could cross the sea only because of the longboat tribe's boats. How ungrateful. No matter how angry Mu-Fa was, it was the truth. The Taiha tribesmen were all on Yinjiao's side. Pieces of ice with unknown things inside were scooped up. Some had only one small thing inside, some had several worms inside, and there were also small animals and things like fish inside. What's frozen inside? Duo Kong was curious. Through the ice, he could roughly see what was inside. However, even though he had lived in the forest for a long time and had seen a lot of things, he did not recognize any of the things inside the ice. He had never seen anything like this before. At least, he had never seen anything like this before. I've never seen anything like this before either. Although Guang Yi was face-blind, he still had some impressions of animals. However, he did not remember seeing these worms and beasts before. The Taiha tribe's chief, Yu, shook his head. They had never seen anything like this before either. "Hey, longboat tribe, have you seen anything like this before?" Duo Kong looked at a longboat tribe tribesman. "No, never seen anything like this before. It must be from the sea." The longboat tribe warrior was overjoyed. He felt like his chief was right. It was definitely from the sea. Otherwise, who would be so bored as to freeze worms and palm-sized animals? To the longboat tribe, everything in the sea was new and strange. They needed to explore. These were all treasures. How can this be from the sea? It looks like it should be living in the grass or the forest, Duo Kong said disapprovingly as he looked at the ice. He wasn't sure about some, but based on the appearance of some, he could deduce where they lived based on what he saw and heard in the forest. What they looked like was related to their living environment. It was impossible for them to look like stone worms and fly in the sky. But, where did these come from? Where was he originally born? Yu was also very puzzled. If it was just one type, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the Taiha, Flaming Horn and Longboat tribes had never seen any of these frozen insects and beasts before. None of them knew any of them. Xiao looked in the direction where the ice floes came from. It was the wind that had pushed the ice floes in this direction. When they came out, the wind at sea was different from now. Even though there were frequent changes, the wind still had a main direction. Now, it was probably because winter was leaving, so the ice floes were pushed in this direction. In the direction where the floating ice flow had come from, there might be even more floating ice flows further away. However, now wasn't the time to look for floating ice. Their main priority was to return safely. The fleet didn't change course. They only slowed down for the time being and scooped up the frozen objects to take a look. Some of the floating ice had melted, exposing some of the insects and beasts inside. They had been bitten by the fish in the sea and were badly damaged and rotten. On the other hand, the ones frozen in the ice were still in perfect condition. They were two extremes. Those that were exposed would rot and be eaten, while those that were frozen would remain in their original state. Most of the things they fished up were completely frozen ice cubes. Those that were half-rotten or had bite marks, even if they were fished up, they would only look at them curiously before throwing them back into the sea. Rumor has it that that direction is an extremely cold place, Yu suddenly said. An extremely cold place? Xiao Xian asked. That's what I saw in the notes left behind by our Taihe ancestors. I didn't think of it before, but when I saw you looking in that direction, I suddenly thought of it, Yu said. We have never been there, so we don't know what it's like. Our ancestors only heard about it, so there aren't many records. Since it's an extremely cold place, there must be very few people there. That's why people rarely talk about it. The weather was bad, and the climate was unsuitable for survival. With so few people, no one was willing to go there. Naturally, things about that place would gradually disappear, and people would no longer mention it. Yu had inadvertently flipped through the notes while waiting for the reply letter. At that time, he didn't pay much attention to it. The world was big, and they couldn't go to every place. Therefore, they only paid attention to things related to themselves and their tribe. He just didn't expect to encounter something like this. When he heard Yu mention that extremely cold place, Xiao Xian had a guess. Regardless of whether there was an extremely cold place or not, if what Yu said was true, and the rumor the Taihe ancestors heard was also true, then there must be icebergs in that place, and these small pieces might have been split off from the icebergs. However, Xiao Xian guessed that the most likely cause was a disaster that caused the icebergs to break away from their main bodies and float on the sea. If the temperature was low and the icebergs were big, then they could exist for a long time. These pieces might have come from one of the icebergs. As for how the iceberg split into so many small pieces, there were too many possible reasons, and they didn't know. Qing Yi, you've swum in the sea before. Have you seen these before? These should be creatures that live in the water, Duo Kong said as he pointed at two of the creatures with fins. No, I haven't seen them in the river either. Qing Yi squatted at the side and looked at the strange-looking insects and beasts curiously. Duo Kong saw that Xiao Xian seemed to be deep in thought, so he asked, Xiao Xian, what do you think? Qing Yi, Guang Yi, Yu, and the others all looked at Xiao Xian, waiting for Xiao Xian's answer. These. Xiao Xian pointed at a few pieces of ice that looked like insects and beasts. He said, these might not be things that live in the present. What do you mean? Mu Fa walked over. They might have existed a long, long time ago, Xiao Xian said. A long time ago? How long is a long time? Mu Fa asked. It could be tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, or even longer. Xiao Xian's words made Mu Fa, Duo Kong and the others gasp. No matter how much they thought about it, they wouldn't have thought of this. 10,000 years was enough for them. Many tribes only left traces from that time. But hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, or even longer. This shocked them. If someone else said this, Mu Fa, Duo Kong and the others would definitely think that person was spouting nonsense. But this was Xiao Xian. Was Xiao Xian wrong when it came to guessing so many things? That long? Duo Kang's voice trembled at the end. Had these things existed even longer than the ancestors? These are all dead, right? Mu Fa pointed at the frozen beasts on the ground and said. Isn't that obvious? How can they still be alive after being frozen for so long? Duo Kong glanced around and picked up a piece of ice that had already melted to the point where its fur was exposed. He had someone light a torch to speed up the melting process. As the ice melted, the strange furry creature that was about the size of an adult warrior's palm appeared in front of everyone. Without the interference of the ice, they could see the strange creature more clearly. Have these really existed for a long time? It doesn't seem to have changed much, Duo Kong sighed. Dead, Guang Yi confirmed. It's injured. It was pierced by a sharp weapon, Duo Kong said as he looked at the strange creature. They then took the half-eaten insect beasts that had been bitten by the fish in the sea. After melting the remaining ice with fire, they found that a few of them had similar wounds on their bodies. The insects with carapaces had been pierced through the neck. The fish and prawns had been pierced through as well. The wounds were similar. Duo Kong cut open the small beast that had been melted and found that there was still some undigested food in its stomach. Yu said that it was probably some kind of grass. What killed them? Duo Kong asked. Who knows? They must have been killed by the beasts that ate them. But now's not the time to think about that. Mu Fa said as he had the Longboat tribe put the ice together. He scooped up some ice floes that didn't contain anything else to keep the temperature low. Meat kept in a cold cave would last longer. These unknown insects that might have come from ancient times needed to be kept in ice to survive, just like how they had been frozen until now. Duo Kong did the same. He wanted to bring some back as a souvenir, so he ordered the people to continue scooping. Xiao Xian looked at the ice from Yanjiao and the Longboat tribe before looking at the sea. There was still a lot of ice. Some had things sealed in it, some didn't. Some had things similar to what they had scooped up. Looking at the ice floes, Xiao Xian suddenly pointed at one of them and said to the people scooping, "Scoop that one up." "Which one are you talking about, Great Elder?" The people scooping the ice didn't know which one Xiao Xian was talking about. "Let me do it." Xiao Xian did it himself. He took the net and scooped up the piece of ice he fancied. "What is this?" Duo Kong looked at the blurry lump in the ice and asked. They scooped up the ice. Because the boat could only carry a limited amount of weight, they couldn't scoop up all the ice. They could only scoop up a little. They scooped up the ice that they could roughly see. They didn't want to waste so much effort only to find out that it was just a lump of dirt. That wouldn't be worth it. Therefore, the piece of ice that Xiao Xian was pointing at had been ignored. They didn't even scoop up the same type. They already had one, so why would they want more? Anyway, they were just curious and wanted to bring it back as a souvenir. I don't know what it is either. Xiao Xian looked at the ice in front of him. After looking at it a few more times, he handed it to the person in charge of storing it. Bring it back with the other ice. Since it was something that Xiao Xian scooped up, the person in charge of storing it didn't dare to be careless. Even if it was just a lump of dirt, they would treat it seriously and carefully. Chapter 704. On the way back, Xiao Xian would check on the ice blocks every few days, as well as the animals that had been frozen for who knows how long. The reason why Xiao Xian picked the ice block was because the bones in the ice block were the best preserved. Before leaving the tribe, Xiao Xian had been studying the desert monster he got from the Hui tribe. He figured out some of its secrets, but he didn't have the time to test it out. So this time, Xiao Xian planned to test his theory on the ancient beast corpses sealed in the ice. The people of Rock Hill City turned the dead into monsters. The most important thing was the bones. The monsters were dead, but they could still move. Their bones were what supported them. Xiao Xian could see the bones of the animals through the ice blocks. The other animals in the ice blocks either had no bones or their bones were dim. Only the bones in the ice block were brighter in Xiao Xian's special vision. This meant that the bones weren't seriously damaged, and they might even be more active. The more active they were, the higher Xiao Xian's chances of success. The one sealed in the ice block didn't look like anything special. The creature inside seemed to be curled up into a ball. Xiao Xian couldn't tell what kind of animal it was. But it didn't matter. The ice blocks they fished up should be able to last until they landed. As long as they saw land, they could get more ice from the mountains to replace the melted water. How long until we reach? Duo Kong asked Xiao Xian. Winter was over and the moon was out. They definitely wouldn't be able to make it in time for the tribe's sacrifice. Xiao Xian looked at the direction the universal eye was facing and estimated the time they would be at sea. Soon. At our current speed, we should be able to see land in 10 days. That's good. Life on the sea was too boring. Duo Kong felt his bones itch and wanted to move around. He still preferred the mountains and forests. The Taiha tribe was also dispirited because they weren't used to it. Only the people of the Longboat tribe were still in a state of excitement. 10 days later. Following the eagle's cry in the sky, everyone's mind shook. We're here? Duo Kong, who had been sleeping, quickly climbed onto the observatory and looked ahead with his binoculars. Haha. They had arrived. We see land. Duo Kong laughed as he shouted down. Many of the dispirited Taiha people also came out and looked ahead. They couldn't see the land yet, but since Duo Kong said that it was right in front of them, they were very excited. For them, this was the beginning of a new life. How's your language and writing these days? It's all right. Normal communication is no problem. We'll be more familiar with each other in the future. It was rare for the Taiha people to chat and laugh with the Yanjiao soldiers. Xiao Xian looked at the wooden compartments in the cabin. Originally, they were filled with ice, but now, 99% of it had melted. Only a little bit of ice was left floating on top. The various insects and beasts that were frozen in the ice were also lying in the water. If they didn't land soon, they would rot and stink in less than 2 days. In fact, some of them were already starting to smell. There were no children or people who hadn't awakened their totemic power on this ship. On this ship, there were only 3 to 5 people who could enter, and they were all strong people with strong resistance to diseases. He ordered people to seal up the melted wooden compartments. Once they landed, they would bring them to the snowy mountains. There were eagle cries in the sky, but they weren't Cha-Cha's cries. They were from other giant mountain eagles. There are people from the Hui tribe here, Xiao Xian heard one of the cries and said. He was familiar with that cry. It was the Hui tribe's Gu-La's eagle named Shan Dao. As the fleet continued to move forward, the land became clearer. They could see the tall mountains and the eagles flying in the sky. Xiao Xian let Cha-Cha bring him over first. You're finally back. Gula stood on Shan Dao's back and shouted when he saw Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha flying over. When did you arrive? Xiao Xian asked. The chief said he was worried that you wouldn't be able to find anyone after you came back, so after you left, people would come here every day. Even in winter, sometimes people would follow, sometimes they would send a few eagles. Now that winter is over, we would also come here. I didn't expect to see you today. Gula looked at the fleet on the sea. There are too many ships. Yes, we built 5 new ships. One of them ran into some problems on the way, so now there are only 24 ships in total, Xiao Xian explained. On the way back, they encountered a hunting sea beast. It crashed into the ship and made it half scrapped. It wouldn't sink for a while, but it couldn't continue sailing. After transferring the people on that ship, the remaining 24 ships continued to sail, which was what Gula saw now. Did you get the people? Gula asked again. Yes, but they're not used to life on the sea. Their mental state isn't very good, so they need to rest for a few days before setting off again. We found a suitable place to rest nearby. It's a cave. Although it can't fit everyone, it can fit about 500 people. A cave that can fit 500 people? That's enough, Xiao Xian said. He let the people in the worst condition rest in the cave. The others either stayed on the ship or found a place to rest outside the cave. Totemic warriors had good resistance to the cold. When they finally touched solid ground, the exhausted Taiha people quickly recovered. They even curiously conversed with the people from the Hui tribe. They weren't familiar with the language here, so they spoke slowly. Since the Taiha people and Yanjiao were allies, and the Hui tribe and Yanjiao were allies, the allies of allies were also allies. That was why Gula and the others were very friendly to the Taiha people. They caught some fresh beasts and brought them over. Xiao Xian asked Cha-Cha to bring the wooden boxes of ice to the snow-covered mountains. There were many mountains nearby, and he wasn't sure if it was because the temperature hadn't risen in this season, but half of them were covered in white. On the colder mountain peaks, the melted water turned into ice again, freezing the insects and beasts. Xiao Xian wore a pair of gloves made of animal hide and washed away the mud on the surface of the unknown creature he scooped up from the ice. Surprisingly, the mud was still tightly wrapped around the creature. As the mud was washed away bit by bit, the creature that Xiao Xian couldn't see clearly was finally completely exposed in front of him. Wings? Xiao Xian looked at the wing-like thing that was wrapped around the creature. There were some thin and short hairs on the wings. Xiao Xian pulled the wings but couldn't move them. He didn't want to force them open either, so he stopped. Instead, he looked at the sharp claws that were exposed. It was the same as a bat's. It was attached to the wings like a hook. Thinking of the fatal wounds on the insects and beasts he found in the ice, he looked at the claws again. Perhaps the wounds on the insects and beasts were caused by these claws. After looking at it for a while, Xiao Xian placed it in a wooden box and covered it with a wooden cover. When he came back tomorrow, it would be frozen again. Chapter 705. Other than the insects and beasts, the fleet also prepared some ice before they left. After coming back, although they hadn't reached the tribe yet, they no longer had the feeling of uneasiness that they had when they were at sea. After resting for a few days, the fleet set off again. In the sky, the people of the Hui tribe escorted them all the way with their giant mountain eagles. They didn't want to encounter any curious giant mountain eagles. Those curious or aggressive giant mountain eagles might cause a lot of trouble for the fleet. With the people of the Hui tribe in the middle, this kind of situation would be reduced a lot. Cha-Cha and the others used to go to Eagle Mountain from here, right? Xiao Xian asked Gula. I don't know. We can't follow the giant mountain eagles to Eagle Mountain, but they probably went this way, Gula said. Maybe it wasn't at the estuary. The giant mountain eagles probably went over the mountains and took a detour. At that time, the disaster hadn't happened yet. The dangerous river was still there, so Cha-Cha and the others wouldn't have gone there. In the past, the people of the Hui tribe thought that Eagle Mountain was in the depths of the mountains. They didn't expect that it wasn't here. It was in the area full of fearsome beasts where Yanjiao lived. When the fleet left the mountains and the giant mountain eagle's habitat, the people of the Hui tribe didn't need to follow them anymore. After bidding farewell, the fleet followed the river on the grassland and went back the way they came. The people of Taiha were much more energetic after resting. Plus, they weren't at sea anymore, so they felt more at ease. They looked at the grassland tribes curiously. Those who were more sensitive could even sense the ancient fire seed. Is that the ancient fire seed? It's amazing. Yu sighed. The Taiha tribe had merged their fire seed a long time ago. There were no more ancient fire seeds on the other side of the sea. They didn't expect to sense it when they came here. Huge power. Even if it was just a fire seed from a small tribe, the power it contained could not be ignored. We can still sense it now, but in a few years, it might be hard to see it again. Duo Kong told you about the changes that were happening here. As the major tribes on the mainland merged their fire seeds one after another, the people of the Hui tribe said that many medium-sized tribes had also started to merge their fire seeds. Perhaps in 5 or 10 years, the small tribes would also start to experience similar changes. Duo Kong excitedly told the Taiha people about the Flaming River trading point. Since they were back, they didn't have to worry too much anymore. Life on the ship was very monotonous. After returning, there wasn't much danger, and the trouble they encountered was also much less. Many people on the riverbank were relieved to see that it was the longboat tribe's fleet. Why did he sigh in relief? Last year, when they saw the longboat tribe's huge ship leave, they didn't see them return until winter. They thought that something had happened to the longboat tribe. It wasn't that they were worried about the longboat people. They were just used to watching the fleet leave and then return. Last year, they had only seen the fleet that had left. They had waited for an entire winter, but they had not seen the fleet return. They always felt that there was something unfinished in their hearts. Now, they finally had peace of mind. Some people felt that it was a pity. If the longboat tribe's fleet had met with an accident, it would definitely be big news. After all, the longboat tribe was known as the strongest tribe on the river. It was rare to see them get into an accident on the river. While Duo Kong was explaining the situation around the flaming river to Yu Yu and the others, Xiao Xian was in the cabin looking at the newly frozen ice cubes. He didn't care about the rest. Duo Kong had just taken them out to sea because they were new to him. He wanted to show them to the people in his tribe who couldn't go out to sea. After all, these were things from a long, long time ago. After seeing them, they couldn't keep them sealed forever. They didn't have the ability to keep them in their original state. The Yinzhou people also wouldn't spend so much time and effort to preserve things that weren't useful to them. Hence, after seeing them, they probably ended up as fertilizer or thrown into swamps or tar pits. What caught Xiao Xian's attention was the thing he had scooped up. After refreezing it, Xiao Xian didn't notice it when he was moving the wooden box. Now that he had time to take a closer look, he noticed that the bones of the thing seemed to have changed. No, it wasn't just the bones. There were other parts as well. Xiao Xian felt a very weak life force. That aura was too faint. If it was left there after the ice melted, that tiny bit of life aura might disappear completely. Hence, he didn't know what this thing was, but it was in a state close to death. It wasn't much different from death. Xiao Xian wanted to find out immediately, but this wasn't the right place. They were on a ship. If he wasn't careful and something happened, the ship might be damaged. That would hinder their return journey. Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry. He just wanted to confirm his guess. When they returned to the Flaming River trading point, the conditions there would be more suitable for him to quietly tinker with these things. Looking at the ice cube, Xiao Xian sighed. He closed the wooden lid and took out a light gray linen cloth. Then, he used a charcoal rod to draw on it. He drew a skeleton made from the bones he saw. He remembered the skeleton's appearance in his special vision. He drew the skeleton onto the cloth and then disassembled it bit by bit. After disassembling it, he felt that it didn't look good enough, so he found some wood and used a knife to cut it into small sticks. Then, he cut the sticks into the general shape of each bone. Some small bones might be omitted, but the main skeleton would be disassembled and made into wooden bones. After he was done, Xiao Xian started piecing the wooden bones together one by one. First, the head. This was the most obvious part. Starting from the head, he pieced the bones together bit by bit. When he didn't know which bone to join, he would start with another obvious feature, the tail. Then, he would start from the tail. If he had trouble with both the head and tail, he would start with the back claws. Once Xiao Xian was immersed in his work, he would easily lose track of time. He rarely left in the middle. After Duo Kong finished talking to Yu Yu and the rest, he looked around and didn't see Xiao Xian. He asked around and found out that Xiao Xian had gone to the place where the ice cube was kept, so he went to look for him. The door was closed. Duo Kong stood at the door and called out softly, "Xiao Xian? Grand Elder?" No one answered. After a pause, Duo Kong raised his hand and knocked lightly on the door. "Xiao Xian, are you in there?" "Yes." Xiao Xian, who was inside, finally came back to his senses. He had been staring at the pieced-together product for a long time. He didn't even hear Duo Kong when he first called him. After Duo Kong entered, the first thing he saw was a skeleton on top of the wooden box. The skeleton was very strange. At first glance, he thought it was a bat, but he quickly realized that it wasn't. It was a different skeleton from a bat. It gave off a more arrogant feeling. After hunting for so long, even if it was just a skeleton, Duo Kong had a rough idea of what it was. What is this? Duo Kong pointed at the unfamiliar skeleton and asked Xiao Xian, I've never seen this before. It's not a bird or a bat. What is this? Xiao Xian rubbed his sore eyes and said, pterosaur. Chapter 706. Pterosaur. Duo Kong was confused. Obviously, this was the first time he had heard of this name. What's a pterosaur? A bird? Duo Kong looked curiously at the skeleton that wasn't very detailed. The more he looked, the tighter his frown became. This doesn't look like a normal bird. If it was bigger, it could be very dangerous. This was only a rough skeleton. As for what the bones were like, how hard they were, and how the muscles were distributed, all of these would affect their judgment of the beast. Therefore, Duo Kong could only give a vague guess. They are different from birds. They probably existed even before the formation of the tribes. Xiao Xian didn't know when the tribes were formed in this world. What he said was still just a guess. Xiao Xian had once wondered if there were other creatures living here in the distant past, before the tribes were formed and before humans occupied the majority of the land. Because there were no records, Xiao Xian didn't think too much about it. After all, the present and the future were the most important. And now, they discovered these things from the ice floes on the sea. All of them reminded Xiao Xian that a long, long time ago, there might have been things that no one knew about. There might have been creatures that no one knew existed. Maybe because of the limited civilization back then, the people who existed back then couldn't record those things. There might be more ice floes in the sea than the ones they found, and it might not have happened this year. It might have happened often, but no one had ever scooped them up. They just let the ice melt and enter the stomachs of the fish beasts in the sea. And this batch was fished up by a passing fleet. The other insects and beasts in the ice were also from the same time period as this pterosaur. Then, in the extremely cold place that you mentioned, were there more frozen animals that existed in the ancient times? If there was a chance, Xiao Xian wanted to go and take a look. There might be dinosaurs. Of course, now wasn't the time to think so much. Since he could roughly guess what was in the ice from the skeleton, Xiao Xian thought about his future plans. When he returned, he would definitely try it out on this creature. What's the matter? Xiao Xian asked Duo Kong. Duo Kong looked away from the wooden skeleton and snapped back to reality. It's the Taiha tribe. I showed them the map of the Flaming River trading point and the headquarters of the tribe. I asked them where they wanted to live. They said they wanted to live in a place similar to the Flaming Horn tribe. They would also let some of their people enter the trading point. After all, they have a lot of things to trade throughout the year. The people of Taiha were good at discovering and growing herbs. In the past, they would only travel 2 or 3 times a year to trade because they were too far away from the cities. Only in the cities could they trade for more goods. Therefore, every year, they would process the herbs and store them. Then, they would wait until a certain time to sell all the accumulated herbs. But now, there was no need for that. Yinjiao had its own trading zone, and the people from Taiha could bring the goods over to trade whenever they had any. It was very convenient. Oh, that's it? Xiao Xian didn't think that Duo Kong would come over just because of this. When they decided to persuade the Taiha tribe to move over, the higher-ups of the tribe had already predicted their choice. Everything was within their expectations. Hey! There's one more thing. Duo Kong smiled and rubbed his hands together in anticipation. You said that our Yinjiao trading point would expand? That's right. Xiao Xian nodded. With the Taiha people joining us, can we expand? Duo Kang's eyes were filled with anticipation. That depends on whether the trading point can be stabilized. We will definitely expand, but there's no rush. We've already put up Yinjiao's stone tablets wherever the king's stone worm passed. We've marked out the territory and built the foundation. It would be a waste if we don't use it. Wherever the king's stone worm passed, a large part of the ground had already turned into stone. It was very stable to build houses on top of it. They could even use the stone to build roads. Of course, the plan was beautiful, but it had to be done step by step. It had to be stable. They didn't want others to take advantage of the expansion. Duo Kong understood Xiao Xian's concerns. He just wanted to confirm how long the plan would take. After the fleet arrived at the Longboat tribe, they rested for a few days in the Longboat tribe. They still needed the Longboat tribe's ships, so they continued to sail along the river. Mu Fa and the others brought back many plants and beasts from another continent. Even though they didn't like the taste of the plants and the size of the beasts' meat, they were all treated as rare treasures by the Longboat tribe because they were brought back from another continent by the fleet. The Longboat tribesmen who returned from the sea looked very different from the Longboat tribesmen who stayed in the tribe. They were more arrogant, fierce, and dangerous. When they joked, their eyes shone with undisguised ambition. That was the change after the sea. In the near future, as more and more Longboat tribesmen left the tribe for the sea, this change would spread to the entire tribe. The Longboat tribesmen would no longer be the Longboat tribesmen everyone knew. Mu Fa and the others didn't continue to follow the fleet. Instead, another group of people followed. Before the fleet set off again, Mu Fa reminded the Longboat tribesmen not to forget to bring back more wood from Yanjiao. "Don't worry, Chief. We won't forget," the leader promised. They also wanted to sail far away. They definitely had to continue building ships, so they wouldn't neglect the wood used to build ships. After setting off from the Longboat tribe, the fleet continued to sail along the river towards the Flaming River. During this time, many mid-sized tribes in the central region had successfully merged their fire seeds. However, there was also one that failed. Failure meant the extinction of the tribe. Xiao Xian didn't know why they failed. He only heard from the Longboat tribesmen that there was an accident during the merging process. The tribe's shaman was killed at the most crucial moment too. There wasn't enough time to choose a successor. "Our shaman said it might be the people from the desert," said the Longboat tribe warrior who led the team. His first reaction would be to guess that it was the people from the other side of the sea. However, if he thought about it carefully, the possibility of it being Rock Hill City wasn't small either. After all, they needed slaves. A tribesman who lost his fire seed would become a wanderer. Wanderers were the best slaves. Xiao Xian didn't know the truth for now. Before he knew the details, he felt that the people from Rock Hill City and the other side of the sea were very likely to be the culprits. The Longboat shaman naturally had his reasons for guessing. However, what the Longboat shaman didn't know was that even totemic warriors could be turned into monsters after death. Wanderers weren't absolutely necessary. When they finally returned to Yanjiao, the weather was much warmer. To show their welcome to their old friends, Yanjiao hosted another banquet at the trading point. However, they didn't invite the big tribes this time. The main guests were Yanjiao and Taiha. Wu He and the other 4 who were locked up in Yanjiao were finally released. The Taiha tribe had come over. According to their agreement, they were free too. Wu He and the other 4 were overjoyed to finally regain their freedom. Although they tried their best to negotiate terms with Yanjiao in exchange for a more comfortable environment, that was only compared to the beginning. Although they still felt cold during this past winter, Yanjiao's animal hides were good and kept them warm. Even so, it couldn't alleviate their boredom and loneliness. Being trapped in a cramped cave was a great torture for the Changla people. Chapter 707. After Yan Jiao released the 5 Changla tribesmen according to their agreement, they thought they would leave immediately. Unexpectedly, Wu He and the rest chose to stay in Yan Jiao's territory. However, they didn't go near Yan Jiao's headquarters. For the time being, they didn't want to go near the place where they were locked up. They stayed at the Flaming River trading point and chatted with the Taiha tribesmen. After all, they were all from the other side of the sea. As for the Changla tribesmen, Yan Jiao had been keeping a close eye on them. If they tried to rob them again, they would kill them without mercy. The Taihe tribesmen went into the forest to choose the location of their tribe and build houses. The Yan Jiao tribesmen also helped, but Xiao Xian didn't have to keep an eye on them. Building houses wasn't difficult for the Yan Jiao tribesmen, and the Yan Jiao tribesmen couldn't help the Taihe tribesmen reclaim the land to plant herbs. After bringing the Taihe tribesmen back, Xiao Xian went to the underground secret room of the Flaming River Castle. In the secret room, there was an ice cube that looked like a pterosaur. It was the one Xiao Xian fished up from the sea. Other than that, there were other things. There were 2 gomphos the size of rabbits. One had just died, and the other was half rotten. The strange man that the Hui tribe brought over was placed in a corner of the secret room. Xiao Xian didn't need to study him anymore. After this experiment, he would burn the strange man. After the Hui tribe gave him away, they didn't want him back. Instead of letting him rot here, they might as well burn him. That way, they could prevent any hidden dangers. If the Hui tribesmen were here right now, they would definitely notice the changes in this strange man. When he was in the Hui tribe, even though this strange man looked like he was dead, he could still feel something special in his body. But now, this strange man was truly dead. All the special aura was gone. Before Xiao Xian left the tribe to go out to sea, he had just discovered some of the secrets of this strange man. He just didn't have time to prove his conjecture. During the voyage, there were too many restrictions on the ship, so Xiao Xian didn't dare to take any risks. If he wasn't careful, he would drag the whole team down with him. That was why he didn't have to worry about making a hole in the ship until now. When Xiao Xian was studying the strange man, he discovered that there were secrets hidden in the strange man's bones. For a dead person without any internal organs, it was almost impossible for them to move. However, this strange man could still walk, run, chase and kill people. What drove him to move was the power in their bones. Bone marrow could produce blood. Even if the bone marrow could no longer produce blood, it could still be turned into bone marrow with the ability to produce blood when needed. After an animal's body died, the bone marrow in its bones still had a certain amount of potential. Xiao Xian called this activity. As long as the bone marrow was still active, then it could be given power again. Even if the body had lost its original consciousness, it could be said that even if it could move again, it was no longer the same person or beast as before. What drove it to move was the power in its bones. It was like a puppet with no self-consciousness. Logically speaking, the longer the time of death, the less active the bones would be, and the lower the success rate. That was why if they wanted to successfully create a monster, they had to deal with it as soon as possible. Of the 2 gomphos, the newly dead one had much more active bones than the half-rotten one. As for the half-rotten gomphos, even if Xiao Xian could make it stand up again, it would only be like a rusty machine. It wouldn't be able to move normally. These were all Xiao Xian's speculations. They were all based on theory, and he hadn't had time to verify them yet. Xiao Xian hadn't expected to encounter the frozen ancient creatures during the voyage. Why did Xiao Xian only choose the pterosaur and not the others? It was because the other frozen ancient creatures had very little activity in their bones. Instead of looking for them, it was better to just randomly pick an animal that had died a long time ago. For example, the half-rotten gomphos next to him had the same level of activity in their bones. However, the pterosaur was different. The activity in its bones made Xiao Xian confident that his experiment would succeed. However, when they arrived at the shore and the ice melted, Xiao Xian discovered that there was something strange about the pterosaur's body. That bit of life force increased the activity in its bones. The reason why this fellow that was suspected to be a pterosaur was different from the other ancient creatures that were sealed in ice was perhaps because it was alive before it was sealed in ice, while the other ancient creatures that were sealed in ice had already been killed before they were frozen. Xiao Xian didn't test the newly dead gomphos. He looked at the block of ice on the stone table and brought the torch closer to it. He melted the water off the ice. As the ice melted, the pterosaur appeared in front of Xiao Xian again. It was still curled up in a ball with its wings wrapped around its body. Its head was also tucked in, so Xiao Xian couldn't see what it looked like. Xiao Xian gently pulled at the wrapped wings, but it didn't budge. He didn't force it either. If Xiao Xian wanted to use the activity in its bones to make it stand up again, the first thing he needed to do was to give it power. Power from the fire seed. The fire seed's power could be fused into the blood of the tribesman, and it could be passed down from generation to generation. Of course, it could also be stored in the bone marrow. Even if the blood didn't work, the bone marrow could still carry the fire seed's power. After wiping the water off the stone table, Xiao Xian looked at the unmoving creature. Its life force wasn't stable. It grew stronger and weaker at times, as if it was in a battle. If it won, its life force would grow stronger and stronger. This ancient creature that had been frozen for God knows how many years might come back to life on its own. If they lost, they would completely fall silent, rotting away like the other frozen ancient creatures. Xiao Xian didn't make a move immediately. He wanted to see what would happen to this ancient creature first. Its life force alternated between strong and weak. It went from slow to fast, then slowed down again. Bit by bit, it began to weaken. It had lost. Maybe it was because it had been frozen for too long that it wasn't strong enough to win this battle of life and death. When its life force gradually weakened and almost disappeared, Xiao Xian raised his hand. Only when the host didn't resist would the success rate be higher. Now that its life force was almost gone, it naturally couldn't resist. This was why Xiao Xian didn't make a move just now. Xiao Xian called out the fire seed's power. This was actually very similar to when he engraved Caesar. At that time, he used the totem's power. Although the totem's power also came from the fire seed, it was still different from the fire seed. Now, Xiao Xian was using the Yinjiao fire seed's power that had fused with his body. However, Xiao Xian didn't completely separate the other power in his body. He allowed it to be used together with the Yinjiao fire seed's power. Sometimes, the other special power in the body was even more useful than the Yinjiao fire seed. If the Yinjiao fire seed's power couldn't make this experiment work, perhaps adding another power would increase the success rate. The totem appeared, and flames appeared on Xiao Xian's outstretched hand. His hand was placed directly above the creature that looked like a pterosaur. The flames slowly spread down until the creature was completely engulfed in flames. It was as if the creature was burning. The flames passed through the skin, muscles, and seeped into every bone. The high vitality of the bones allowed them to quickly absorb the power of the flames. Xiao Xian used his special vision to observe the creature and found that the creature's bones were changing. The original bones seemed to be dyed red. This was due to the infiltration of power. At first, only the bones with bone marrow were changing, but soon, Xiao Xian found that it wasn't just that. Like the melting of frozen blood, Xiao Xian felt that the creature's blood was beginning to flow. Xiao Xian saw that some thin red lines were beginning to appear. Those were blood vessels. The red color was the power of the fire seed that had fused with the blood. To a certain extent, this was another way of fusing fire seeds. However, the target was different, and the purpose was different. Thump thump. The sound of a heartbeat suddenly sounded. Hearing this sound, Xiao Xian was stunned. Logically speaking, this shouldn't have happened. After all, the creature was already dead, just like those monsters. They had lost their hearts and other organs, but they could still stand up. It was obvious that those monsters didn't need a heart. But now, the heart of the creature under his palm was starting to beat. Thump thump. Thump thump. At first, it was very weak, but it gradually became stronger. As more and more thin red lines appeared, especially those gathered around the heart, they were especially active. The heartbeat also became faster. At first, it could only be heard twice, but it was rhythmic like breathing. The life force became stronger, like an eruption that suddenly broke through ice. All of this proved that this creature was waking up. Xiao Xian didn't stop. It also didn't reject Xiao Xian's method. It didn't reject the power of the fire seed. Perhaps, it also knew that this was the only way for it to wake up. Its frozen body began to warm up. The wings that had been wrapped around it moved slightly, emitting a slight cracking sound. The exposed hind claws slowly extended outwards. Xiao Xian found that its hind legs were thicker than those of a bat and looked more powerful. Caw caw caw. The wrapped wings loosened again, opening bit by bit to both sides. The head that was curled inside also extended outwards. Xiao Xian looked at the ancient creature that was unwrapped. Without a doubt, this was a pterosaur. However, compared to many pterosaurs that Xiao Xian knew, this one was much smaller. Chapter 708. Xiao Xian didn't know if the pterosaur was so small because it was still in its infancy, or if it was the size of an adult. He didn't know the answer yet. As its body warmed up, its blood flowed, and its heart beat strongly. The pterosaur, which was placed on the stone table, finally opened its eyes after spreading its wings. As a reptilian beast, its eyes looked sharp and murderous, but they weren't as cold as those of a snake or crocodile. As soon as it opened its eyes, it seemed to be in a daze, unable to adapt to its current situation. After being frozen for so long, its brain couldn't work properly. After a while, Xiao Xian saw the pterosaur on the table turn its head and look at him. It seemed to be frightened and wanted to retreat, but after struggling for a while, it fell down again. Although its body began to move slowly after thawing, it was still far from being able to move freely. Since it couldn't move, it could only open its mouth and roar threateningly. Xiao Xian noticed that there were some sharp teeth in its mouth. Some pterosaurs had teeth, while others didn't. The one in front of him now belonged to the former, and it looked a little fierce. Xiao Xian observed the changes in its body. The pterosaur's body temperature was rising, but it was different from other reptiles. It was more like a bird, and its body temperature stopped rising after a certain range. Its organs began to move, and it knew how to be vigilant and threaten people. Its brain also began to have self-awareness. At this time, it truly came back to life from its frozen state. Contrary to Xiao Xian's expectations, Xiao Xian originally wanted to use it to test out how to control bones. He didn't expect things to turn out like this. However, it wasn't too bad. After all, this was a creature that lived a long time ago. Xiao Xian was very curious about it, and he was also very interested in the era it originally lived in. Since there was such an existence, did it mean that there were more ancient beasts that existed in some unknown place in this world? Other than some small ventilation holes, there were no gaps large enough for it to escape. Therefore, Xiao Xian was not worried that it would escape. Besides, it had just recovered, and its body's skills had not yet returned to normal. It would be difficult for it to get up, so there was no need to worry. Leaving it to struggle, Xiao Xian walked to the other side of the table and looked at the recently slaughtered gomphos. Compared to the half-rotten one, Xiao Xian decided to try this one first. Just as he was about to attack, Xiao Xian suddenly felt a strong gaze on him. He turned his head and saw the pterosaur, who had been trying to flip itself over, staring at him. To be more precise, the pterosaur was staring at his gomphos. Hungry? After being frozen for so long, it wasn't strange for it to be hungry. If it wanted to recover quickly, eating was indeed a way to recover. It was also one of the instincts of wild beasts. Xiao Xian used his knife to cut off a piece of meat from the gomphos and handed it to the pterosaur, who was struggling to flip itself over on the table. When Xiao Xian approached, the pterosaur cautiously took a step back. It almost lost its balance and fell down again. Its forelimbs were highly degraded. Its fourth finger had become a wing finger, and its wings were no longer flexible. However, hunger still forced it to accept the food in front of it. The pterosaur quickly bit down on the piece of meat in Xiao Xian's hand. It opened its mouth twice and swallowed it. The next moment, it raised its head and bit down on Xiao Xian's hand. It didn't look like it was joking. Its teeth looked like it was going to bite Xiao Xian's finger and leave a few bloody holes. However, Just as it was about to bite Xiao Xian's finger, it stopped abruptly. It didn't want to stop, but it had no choice. At this moment, it had no control over its body. Get down. As soon as Xiao Xian's voice fell, the pterosaur, which had already stood up, involuntarily fell back onto the table. It spread its wings and extended its two hind limbs. Its entire body was pressed against the stone table. Gah! A sharp sound rang out in the secret underground room. This was the pterosaur's terrified cry as it was forced to lie down. No one would be able to remain calm when they couldn't control their own body, let alone an ancient beast that was extremely cautious of its surroundings. Xiao Xian glanced at the pterosaur, who was lying on the stone table, and then looked away. It could be said that this was a special method of enslavement. The only difference was that compared to normal enslavement, this method was more suitable for humans or animals who had lost their own consciousness. This was because this method was equivalent to taking over the body. The pterosaur had full control over the body, and not the body's owner. Therefore, enslavement would be much smoother when the body had lost its consciousness. The success rate would also be higher. Furthermore, after enslavement, the pterosaur would be able to completely control the slave and would not have to worry about betrayal. Normal enslavement wouldn't allow the pterosaur to completely control the slave. For example, Xiao Xian could sense Sapphire's position and the general condition of its body. He could also influence the power in Sapphire's body. After all, that power was given by Xiao Xian during the enslavement. However, this pterosaur was different. Although the pterosaur was able to stand up again because of Xiao Xian's power, the power had been directly integrated into every bone in its body. Xiao Xian could control every bone in the pterosaur's body. This was also why Xiao Xian didn't tie it up and allowed it to move freely on the table. No matter what the pterosaur wanted to do, Xiao Xian could stop it at any time. He could even break its bones without touching it. However, compared to normal enslavement, this special enslavement method required more and purer power. The pterosaur that was forced to lie on the stone table screamed for a while before its attention was drawn to the gomphos that had just been killed. It looked at the gomphos that still reeked of blood, then looked at Xiao Xian cautiously. Then, it looked back at the gomphos. Xiao Xian ignored it. He continued to use the same method on the dead gomphos that had lost its consciousness. Xiao Xian didn't remove its organs. He was just trying it out. He didn't plan on using it for a long time, so he didn't do anything else. Since the gomphos hadn't been dead for too long, its bones were still quite active. It also didn't have any consciousness, so Xiao Xian's enslavement went smoothly. The pterosaur had been staring at the gomphos, thinking about how to eat it. However, when flames suddenly appeared in Xiao Xian's hands, the pterosaur let out a sharp cry. Its voice was filled with infinite panic and fear. It was far more terrified than when it was being controlled. Xiao Xian frowned, but he didn't stop what he was doing. He ignored the pterosaur's screams. The gomphos that had already lost its life force was rapidly changing. This change wasn't on the outside, but on the inside. Whoosh! The dead gompho's stiff body suddenly became flexible. It flipped over and stood up. When it moved, Xiao Xian could even hear the sound of its stiff muscles being forcefully moved. Chapter 709. During this special enslavement process, Xiao Xian compared the gomphos to the pterosaur. Compared to the pterosaur, enslaving the gomphos required a lot less energy and was much simpler. Part of the reason was that the gomphos didn't have self-awareness, but the most important part was its nature. Even though the gomphos' bones were more active, they weren't of high quality. Simply put, their bones couldn't contain much fire seed energy. This was just a normal wild beast in the forest. It was at the bottom of the food chain, so its bones couldn't contain too much energy. The pterosaur wasn't big either. In fact, it was even smaller than the gomphos. However, while enslaving it, Xiao Xian noticed that the pterosaur's bones could fuse with more fire seed energy than the gomphos. The amount of fire seed energy a bone marrow could fuse with had nothing to do with its size. Then, could it be that the higher the rank of the species, the stronger the person, the more energy they could contain? Xiao Xian decided to go to the vicious beast meat stall and catch a freshly slaughtered vicious beast. Just as he was about to leave, Xiao Xian remembered the pterosaur that was still lying on the stone table. He turned around and saw the pterosaur twisting its neck to look at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian turned around and opened the door to the secret room. He walked out and closed the heavy stone door behind him. The moment he closed the door, Xiao Xian released his control over the pterosaur. However, he didn't go far. Instead, he stood outside the secret room for a while. Xiao Xian could feel the pterosaur's every movement. It was as if everything was projected into his mind. However, it wasn't an image of the pterosaur's entire body. It was just a skeleton that had fused with the fire seed energy. He could even see the creature's swaying tail clearly. After Xiao Xian left, the pterosaur thought that it had regained its freedom. After it got up, it looked around cautiously and let out a cry. When it didn't see anything out of the ordinary, it cautiously waited for a while. Then, it crawled towards the gomphos on the other side of the table. Its wings were a little more flexible than when it had just thawed, and it could climb up faster. The smell of the gomphos' blood made it crawl even faster. Almost as soon as it reached the gomphos, it stretched its neck and opened its mouth to bite the gomphos. In the beginning, the meat that Xiao Xian had given it was not enough to satisfy its hunger. It wasn't strong enough yet, so it could only use its fangs to scrape the flesh off the gomphos' body bit by bit. It didn't scrape a lot of flesh off each time, but it ate very quickly. Xiao Xian watched at the door of the secret chamber for a while before leaving. There was nothing important inside. No matter how hard the pterosaur tried, it would be useless. It couldn't pierce through the thick stone walls of the secret chamber, right? At the same time, Xiao Xian also wanted to know how far he could effectively control the pterosaur. The more he learned, the more Xiao Xian felt that there was a lot of information hidden in this book that would allow him to better understand the person who invented this special enslavement method. Up until now, no one knew who or what group had enslaved these strange people. EC said that the E family was involved in this, but no one knew how much they were involved. What role did the person who had left the E family 1,000 years ago play in all of this? Xiao Xian shook his head and continued to walk outside. He tried to feel the image in his mind. As long as it was within his effective control range, the image of the pterosaur should still be there. Even after Xiao Xian walked out of the flaming river castle, the image in his mind was still clear. The pterosaur was still eating. He went to the stall that sold vicious beast meat and picked up a freshly slaughtered vicious beast to carry back. The pterosaur, who had been biting into its food, heard the noise and immediately shrunk behind the gomphos. Xiao Xian ignored it and placed the vicious beast he carried back on the stone table. This vicious beast had already been slaughtered. Its organs had been removed, and the blood had been drained. It had also been roughly wiped clean, so only a small amount of blood had dripped onto the table. The pterosaur, who was hiding behind the gomphos, poked its head out to look at Xiao Xian when it smelled the blood. It seemed to be trying to determine if Xiao Xian would beat it to the ground again. Then, it looked at the vicious beast. It wanted to go forward but didn't dare to. Obviously, it was interested in the ferocious beast. The meat of a ferocious beast was different from that of an ordinary wild beast. Different animals were attracted to different kinds of meat. This pterosaur was obviously more attracted to vicious beasts. It was just afraid of Xiao Xian, so it didn't dare to go forward. Xiao Xian used the same method to enslave this vicious beast. Just as Xiao Xian had guessed, vicious beast bones could absorb more fire seed energy than normal beasts. However, it still couldn't be compared to humans. When Xiao Xian was studying the strange man, although he didn't complete the experiment, he could still make a rough guess. Combined with the few experiments he had done so far, Xiao Xian guessed that compared to vicious beasts, humans had a much stronger affinity with fire seeds. This was probably why the people of Rock Hill City chose humans over desert beasts. After the experiment, Xiao Xian prepared to carry the vicious beast out. He only wanted to test the enslavement method and the fire seed energy on this vicious beast. After the experiment, he could still eat it. Of course, he wouldn't sell it at the stall anymore. He would feed it to the Yanjiao people in the Flaming River Castle. These were the bones of a vicious beast with a fire seed, so it was different from others. Before he carried it out, Xiao Xian saw that the pterosaur was still staring at him, so he cut off a piece of meat and placed it on the stone table. Then, he carried the vicious beast and left. After leaving the secret room, Xiao Xian handed the vicious beast to the people in the Flaming River Castle who were preparing for lunch. Cut off the bones and boil them into soup. Don't waste the marrow inside. These are bones with a fire seed, Xiao Xian said. The Yanjiao warrior who took the vicious beast was confused. He looked at the vicious beast in his hand and felt that something was wrong. Since he couldn't figure it out, the warrior didn't think too much about it. He just followed the Grand Elder's instructions. After taking a few steps, he slapped his head. The Grand Elder's words could be summed up in one word. Wasn't it just eating? He understood. When he returned to the secret room, almost a third of the vicious beast meat that Xiao Xian left there before he left had been eaten. The meat that Xiao Xian left behind was about the same size as the pterosaur's body. Judging from the pterosaur's posture, it didn't seem like it had any intention of stopping. Xiao Xian didn't know how much it would eat in the end. Perhaps it realized that Xiao Xian didn't attack it twice, so the pterosaur became bolder. It was mainly because it was in front of food, so it became bolder than usual. However, it still didn't dare to approach Xiao Xian. It looked at Xiao Xian with eyes full of fear. Xiao Xian only glanced at the pterosaur and didn't look at it anymore. He planned to test out the half-rotten gomphos. After all, he had already brought it here. It would be a waste if he didn't use it. When Xiao Xian was trying to enslave it, he also spared some time to observe the pterosaur's reaction. When he was enslaving the vicious beast, the pterosaur showed a terrified expression. Although it didn't scream, it hid behind the gomphos. In Xiao Xian's mind, he could even see the pterosaur's trembling face. Now, when Xiao Xian's hand was on fire, the pterosaur didn't even care about the temptation of food. It immediately looked for a place to hide. In its panic, it fell off the stone table. If it hadn't spread its wings to cushion the fall, its newly thawed body wouldn't have been able to withstand the fall. It might even have broken bones. The half-rotten gomphos didn't take too long for Xiao Xian to enslave. It was the fastest out of the three beasts that Xiao Xian tried to enslave. However, under Xiao Xian's control, the half-rotten gomphos' bones started to fall apart as it walked. It was like a malfunctioning machine that couldn't be controlled accurately. It's not working if it's not active enough. As expected, it was because of the active bones. No wonder the monsters that the people from Rock Hill City made weren't rotten. Although they looked a little strange, it was obvious that they had been processed. The people who enslaved the monsters seemed to value the quality of the monsters. After Xiao Xian cracked the secret of the mysterious desert monsters, Xiao Xian also told everyone the secret during a meeting with the Yanjiao's higher-ups. However, not everyone could use this method to enslave a dead beast. Other than Xiao Xian, the excited Jing Luo, Duo Kong, and the two retired shamans all failed. Guizhe didn't try because he was researching a type of herb. Therefore, among the people in the Yanjiao tribe who knew the secret, only Xiao Xian was able to successfully enslave a beast using this method. After learning that the ancient beast that Xiao Xian brought back was alive, the Yanjiao people were very curious. The other ice cubes were either melted or turned into fertilizer. Only a few special ones were kept in good condition. The two retired shamans found a cave on a high mountain to store them. They said they wanted to keep them as a memento for the future generations of Yanjiao to see. After all, these were things from a long, long time ago. They might even be older than their ancestors. But now, they heard that one of them was alive. The two retired shamans couldn't wait to see this strange little monster. According to Duo Kong, it looked like a bird but wasn't a bird. For the past few days, Xiao Xian had been training the pterosaur in the secret underground room. After all, it was an ancient beast. Even if it was small, it couldn't be underestimated. After the pterosaur's rapid recovery, Xiao Xian had already seen its ferocity. It wouldn't be good if he let it out and let it attack his own people. Therefore, when the group of people ran to the flaming river castle and followed Xiao Xian to the secret underground room and opened the door, the first thing they smelled was the stench of blood and a foul odor. Xiao Xian also felt that the smell was very strong, but before he could train the pterosaur properly, he could only keep it this way. On the stone table, there was a piece of meat that had been bitten. It looked like it had eaten a lot. The water moon stones on the wall were still lit up. In the corner, there was a bird cage made of rattan. The bird cage didn't have a door and was empty inside. There was even feces at the bottom of the cage. If they only relied on their hearing, they wouldn't be able to tell where the pterosaur was hiding. But with the fire seed's aura, they could sense its presence. Under the table, in the shadows, there was a figure that looked like a bat hanging upside down on the edge of the table. Because of the angle and the light, it was difficult for the people standing at the door to see it. Chapter 710. The pterosaur had always been vigilant of its surroundings. Although it had grown closer to Xiao Xian, who had been feeding it for the past few days, it was still mostly afraid of him. After a few days, the pterosaur had mostly recovered to the state it was in before it was frozen. Its reflexes and senses were much sharper. When there was movement at the door of the secret room, it could sense that Xiao Xian wasn't the only one there. There were many other unfamiliar presences around, which was why it hid so quickly. It didn't learn this method of hiding from bats. When it used to live in the forest, it would also hide in the bushes when it encountered danger. It would hide behind leaves or dense branches. After all, it was small in size, unlike the large pterosaurs that dominated the sky. Yes, during this time, Xiao Xian realized that this pterosaur might have been a small pterosaur. He probably wouldn't be able to see the large pterosaurs that were comparable to Cha-Cha. When Xiao Xian pulled the pterosaur out from under the table, the others gathered around the table to take a closer look at this ancient creature. "This is the pterosaur you were talking about?" Jing Luo looked at the pterosaur on the table. "It looks really strange. It doesn't look like a bird or a bat. Did it really come from a long time ago?" Ao wanted to reach out and pull at its wings, but it dodged. It could feel the power of the Yinjiao fire seed. It could feel other Yinjiao people that were similar to it. Although they looked different, their presences were similar. Same kind? That was its first thought. Although it didn't understand why these guys looked so different from it, it knew what to do. Xiao Xian had been training it for the past few days. He used his actions to teach it that if it attacked someone with a similar fire seed aura, it would be punished. That was why it didn't dare to attack. It could only hide and watch the people around it vigilantly. It's hard to believe that it's still alive after being frozen for so long. It's so small. Duo Kong gestured with his hand. It wasn't even as big as the 2 gomphos he had given to Xiao Xian. What an amazing life force. Since we found one, Xian, what do you think happened to the other beasts that lived in that era? The retired old shaman stroked his beard. From the insects and beasts in the ice and the revived pterosaur, the ferocious beasts of that era might be very different from those of today. Yes, the ferocious beasts back then were indeed different from the ones now. But as for why they disappeared, I don't know. However, I have some ideas these days, Xiao Xian said. The Yinjiao people didn't ask Xiao Xian how he knew all this because they didn't think it was important. Even if they did, Xiao Xian would say that it was his ancestors who told him. They would definitely believe him. To them, what was important was what Xiao Xian said, not where Xiao Xian learned all this. When they heard Xiao Xian say this, the 2 retired shamans became interested. The others also looked at Xiao Xian, waiting for Xiao Xian to continue. Xiao Xian said that the pterosaur and the other ferocious beasts might have lived in an era earlier than Yanjiao's ancestors. This was something they couldn't imagine. They couldn't imagine what it was like back then, and what kind of status did the people of that era have. Tell me, why do you think they disappeared? Maybe it's because of the fire seed, Xiao Xian said. Fire seed? The others were confused. What did this have to do with the fire seed? I found that this pterosaur was very afraid of the fire seed's flames. On the contrary, although it would avoid the flames of ordinary firewood, it didn't have such a strong reaction. When Xiao Xian tried that special enslavement method, he discovered this phenomenon. He tested it a few more times in the following days, but the results were the same every time. Afraid of the fire seed's flames? Other ferocious beasts would be fine, but didn't you say that it was able to recover because of the fire seed's power? Moreover, it also has the aura of Yanjiao's fire seed in its body. Why would it be afraid? The others didn't understand. People from different tribes would reject the fire seeds of other tribes, but people or beasts with the same fire seed's power shouldn't have such a reaction. For example, the engraved pterosaurs in the tribe shouldn't be afraid of Yanjiao's fire seed. Regarding this, I think it should know that my fire seed's flames can't hurt it, but it reacted with fear. It seems to be an instinctive reaction. As long as the fire seed's flames appear, it will desperately try to escape and hide. I'm guessing that before it was frozen, it saw something related to the fire seed. It seemed to be a conditioned reflex, and when it sensed the fire seed, it wanted to avoid it. Wait. The two shamans took out pens and animal skin scrolls at the same time, and quickly recorded something. Then they said to Xiao Xian, "Continue." It was a professional reaction. Even after retirement, the two old men were still very interested in things related to history. Even if Xiao Xian said it was just a guess, they would still record it down. So what if it couldn't be proven? Maybe the descendants of Yanjiao would be able to find the answer. After looking at the two old men's notes, Xiao Xian continued. If, and I'm saying if, this pterosaur had seen the fire seed before it was frozen, and it wasn't long before it was frozen, then its reaction would make sense. If it was too long ago, its memory would fade, but if it had seen the fire seed not long before it was frozen, it would be more likely to have such a reaction after it woke up. Generally speaking, the tribe's fire seed would be placed in the fire pit. After all, it was so long ago, and there shouldn't have been any fusion of fire seeds. Everyone nodded. Of course, they understood what Xiao Xian said. Even on the other side of the sea, the fusion of fire seeds couldn't have happened 100,000, 1,000,000, or even 10 million years ago. If it really existed at that time, it could only be in the state of a primitive fire seed. Although I don't know what happened at that time, I'm guessing that it was brought about by the primitive fire seed. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so afraid. The way it looked at the fire seed's flames wasn't unfamiliar. It was as if it had seen something familiar and terrifying. Xiao Xian couldn't sense the pterosaur's thoughts like he could Sapphire. That special enslavement method only targeted the bones, not the mind. Xiao Xian really didn't know what the pterosaur was thinking. He could only judge and guess based on some details. Everyone accepted Xiao Xian's explanation. In their hearts, the fire seed was the most powerful thing in the world. If there was anything that could make all the beasts that lived in that ancient era disappear, it was probably the fire seed. They couldn't accept other reasons. Was there anything more powerful than the fire seed? They didn't believe it. However, guesses are just guesses. There are still many things that don't make sense. But no one knows what happened at that time except for this one. Xiao Xian pointed at the pterosaur on the stone table, who was still vigilantly looking around. Because he had used the enslavement method before, Xiao Xian wasn't confident that he could use the same method he used to enslave Sapphire again. The difference between the two methods was too great. If he wasn't careful, the pterosaur would explode. If that happened, not even a bone would be left. Moreover, that was something that happened a long time ago. There was no need to figure it out. They weren't archaeologists. If they had the energy, they might as well dig a river and build a house by the flaming river. The Yinjiao people were just curious. They didn't intend to pursue the matter. You must take good care of it. Xian, if you can't take care of it, you can let us 2 old men do it. It has seen the fire seed from a long, long time ago. It's an ancient beast that lived longer than our ancestors. It's alive. Before leaving the secret room, the 2 retired shamans looked back at the stone table reluctantly. Among everyone here, other than Xiao Xian, the 2 old men were the most interested in the pterosaur. According to the 2 shamans, they wanted to make the pterosaur their tribe's mascot. Xiao Xian didn't think that way. The pterosaur wasn't big, but it had a ferocious temperament. Mascot? It was good enough that it didn't hurt people. After everyone left, Xiao Xian looked at the pterosaur that had jumped down from the stone table and glided to the ground to look for food. Based on its performance today, they should be able to bring it out in a few days. 5 days later, Xiao Xian carried a cage made of new bronze and left the secret underground room. The cage was covered with a thin layer of cloth, and there were some holes in the cloth. The people outside could not see the situation inside the cage through those small holes, but inside the cage, there was a pair of eyes looking out curiously through the holes. Xiao Xian didn't open the cage in the flaming river castle. Instead, he carried the cage all the way out of the trading point and walked over the flaming river bridge to Yanjiao's headquarters. There were people from the Flaming Horn tribe, the Taiha tribe, the Drumming tribe, the Rain tribe, and some from the surrounding tribes. There were even a few travelers who came from afar. Digging the river required manpower. Not all of these people were from Yanjiao and Taiha. After all, there were other things to do in other places. Taiha was still under construction, so they had limited manpower. That was why they could only hire some people. Those who were strong enough and willing to work could also trade their labor for things from Yanjiao. Yanjiao even provided 2 meals a day. There were other travelers who wanted to join, but they were too late. They already had enough manpower and were just starting work. The stone bridge directly blocked the flaming river's surface. If they wanted to travel upstream and downstream, it would be very troublesome. That was why they planned to dig a river that bypassed the fossilized area and connected downstream. It was a big project, but they weren't in a hurry. Yanjiao had dug a man-made lake before, so they had some experience in this area. They didn't find it troublesome. When Xiao Xian arrived, they were busy digging. Xiao Xian gave them a fearsome beast he brought from the trading point as an extra for their lunch. He asked about the progress of digging the river and whether there were any problems. When he heard from the person in charge that everything was going smoothly, Xiao Xian didn't stay for long. He carried the cage and walked towards the flaming river bridge. "What's that in the Great Elder's hand?" a Yanjiao warrior asked his companion as he watched Xiao Xian leave. "I don't know, but I can feel the energy of Yanjiao's fire seed." "That's strange. Did the Great Elder imprint another fearsome beast? How big is that cage? The one inside is even smaller. How can it be a fearsome beast? What else can it be if it's not a fearsome beast? How can the Great Elder just imprint a normal beast?" "That's true. Sai, we'll know in the future. The Great Elder will definitely let it out." Chapter 711. Xiao Xian carried the cage back to the headquarters. He found a secluded place and opened the cage. The moment he lifted the cloth, the pterosaur eagerly climbed out. When Xiao Xian walked over, the pterosaur had seen the situation outside through the gaps in the cloth covering the cage. It had also smelled the familiar scent of the forest. Although it was different from what it remembered, as long as it was a forest, it was very excited. After being locked up in the underground chamber for so long, facing the water moonstones and the surrounding stone walls every day, the pterosaur was so excited that it wanted to fly at any time. However, when it was in the cage, it didn't dare to move. If it did, Xiao Xian would forcibly suppress it. After that, it learned to be obedient. Before the cage was opened, it didn't dare to jump around. When it stepped on the green grass, it lowered its head and sniffed the grass. It pecked at it, then flapped its wings and flew up. It wasn't clear if it was because of the pterosaur, or if it was just like that, but when it flew, it was obvious that it wasn't as agile as Cha-Cha and the other birds that were good at flying. After flying to a tree, it stood high up and looked down at the forest and grass below. It also saw the river not far away. It flapped its wings and looked at Xiao Xian. It didn't dare to run around. If it wasn't careful, it might be controlled midway and fall to its death. Therefore, after being released from the cage, the pterosaur looked at Xiao Xian for a while. Seeing that Xiao Xian wasn't angry, it continued to fly. Due to its small size, it didn't pose much of a hindrance in moving through the forest. Its original color was a mix of green and brown with some other colors. This combination of colors was very suitable for hiding in the branches. Xiao Xian also noticed that it had started to learn to hide its aura. It wasn't its own aura. Hiding one's aura was a hunting skill that it had mastered long ago. It was now learning to hide the aura of the Yinjiao fire seed that had fused into its bone marrow. In the future, it might be able to master the way to control its aura even faster. Once it had mastered its control, as long as it deliberately hid itself, other than Xiao Xian, it would be difficult for anyone to discover it. Sometimes, some small-sized beasts could not be underestimated. They could be more dangerous than those large-sized beasts. Xiao Xian didn't bring it to the tribe's residential area. Instead, he let it roam in the forest at the edge of the forest. There was a sentry tower here. After patrolling, the patrolling soldiers would rest there. Xiao Xian saw that the pterosaur's performance was not bad after it came out, so he tried to bring it over. During this period of time, it had already understood some simple instructions. Therefore, when Xiao Xian signaled it to follow, it did not care about the insects hiding behind the leaves. It immediately turned around and glided through the forest, following Xiao Xian. Great Elder. A group of people who were resting under the forest stood up and said. They had just finished patrolling and were resting here. After resting, they would continue patrolling until someone came to replace them. After the patrol team greeted Xiao Xian, they looked at another figure. Xiao Xian pointed at the pterosaur resting on a tree nearby and said to the patrol team, "It might be active around here recently. You guys keep an eye on it. Don't be careless. It's fierce." The patrol team looked over. The bird resting on the tree was also looking at them. Its pupils shrank into a vertical oval, looking a little sharp. Experienced hunters could tell what kind of beast an animal was from its eyes. Some herbivores that were hunted by predators had horizontal pupils, while some predators that were good at ambushing had vertical pupils. Not to mention the circular pupils or other shapes of pupils, this method of identification was very limited, but it was also a method that experienced hunters liked to teach newbies. It didn't matter if this bird was fierce or not, at least they didn't treat it as a harmless herbivore. After notifying the patrol team, Xiao Xian went up to the watchtower to inform the people on the watchtower. The pterosaur was waiting on the tree branch until it saw Xiao Xian appear on the watchtower. It then flapped its wings and flew up to rest on the top of the watchtower. Xiao Xian was talking to the people on the watchtower when Duo Kong came over to call him. "I saw you just now. Come, let's go take a look at the Taiha tribe. I heard that they're almost done with the houses and farmland today. We can discuss hunting now." The Taiha tribe definitely had to hunt when they came here. There were naturally places to hunt. After all, this was a huge forest. Yinjiao's 6 hunting routes didn't cover much of it, and this was only the nearby ones. The Yinjiao hadn't set foot in much of the forest further away. However, if the Taiha tribesmen wanted to open up a new hunting route, it would take more than a day or two. That was why the Taiha tribesmen had been following the Flaming Horn tribesmen to familiarize themselves with the forest. As for which direction they would go, they had not decided yet. Xiao Xian heard this, and since he didn't have anything to do, he followed Duo Kong. However, he didn't bring the pterosaur with him. Instead, he let it roam around nearby. Even if Xiao Xian went to the Taiha tribe, he could still sense its location and control it. Xiao Xian had tested the effective distance, and the Taiha tribe was still within this distance. After Xiao Xian and Duo Kong left, the Yanjiao warriors on the watchtower couldn't hold back their curiosity and stuck their heads out to look at the top of the watchtower. They hadn't seen any of the tribe's birds recently, not counting the ducks and animals. After returning from the sea, the Cha-Cha would often go to the forest to look for food. Perhaps it was bored of life at sea, so it came back to play with all its might. Sometimes, it wouldn't even be seen for a few days. Guigu's snow falcon, on the other hand, was too fast and disappeared with a whoosh. Most of the time, it stayed near the residential area. The people on the watchtower looked at this strange bird. Yes, in the eyes of the Yanjiao people, anything with wings was a bird. It was just that this bird looked different from the ones they had seen before, so they were curious. I heard that the Grand Elder brought it back from the sea, someone said. A bird from the sea? It really looks strange. The pterosaur probably didn't like being stared at, so it spread its wings and glided down from the watchtower. The watchtower was close to the flaming river. Standing on the watchtower, they could see the river through the forest. The pterosaur that jumped down from the watchtower glided all the way to the river. Ah, it flew away. It can't have gone far, right? Look, it's flying into the river. On the other side, the pterosaur that was gliding over flapped its wings twice, then retracted them and plunged into the river. It's a duck. It can swim. The Yanjiao warriors on the watchtower were shocked. Their tribe's ducks didn't look like this. Something's wrong. Look. What's going on over there? Let's go. Quick, quick, quick. The panicked voices of the people on the watchtower alerted the patrol team resting below. They all rushed towards the flaming river. The people on the watchtower saw the water splashing as if there was an intense battle going on under the water. Of course, they were worried about the strange bird that dived into the water. After all, there were many piranhas in the flaming river. And that strange bird was brought here by the Grand Elder. If something happened to it, they wouldn't be able to explain it to the Grand Elder. Everything happened too quickly under their noses. By the time they got there, they were already a step too late. There were already bloodstains on the water. Xiao Xian, who was walking towards the Tai River with Duo Kong, paused. What's wrong? Duo Kong asked. Wait a minute, I'll go back and take a look. There's a small matter over there. What small matter? I'll go take a look too. Duo Kong didn't think that Xiao Xian would go back to take a look. It wouldn't be a small matter. When the two of them reached the flaming river, the people on the watchtower and the patrol team were all gathered there. What happened? Duo Kong strode forward. The people immediately moved aside, revealing a bloody mess on the ground. It wasn't a pterosaur that dived into the river. It was a piranha that was half the size of a human. At this moment, the piranha was a bloody mess. There wasn't a single piece of good meat left, including its scales. Its dorsal fin had been forcefully torn off, a section of its tail was missing, its eyes were gone, and even its gills were torn out. It wasn't bitten by a piranha. Although it was, the main wound wasn't caused by a piranha. Duo Kong had seen piranhas bite prey before. It was different from this. This. What's going on? Duo Kong asked the people around him. The people on the watchtower and the patrol team all looked at the strange bird that was shaking the water off its wings. Duo Kong looked at the pterosaur on the tree, then at the pitiful piranha in front of him. Finally, he looked at the Yanjiao soldiers around him. His eyes were filled with disbelief. It did this? The people around him nodded in unison. It was true. They saw it with their own eyes. When they fished the fish out, the strange bird was still biting and tearing at its flesh. As for the person they were worried about, nothing happened to him. Perhaps it was because the strange bird had sensed Xiao Xian's arrival, but it was still glaring fiercely at the fisherman. Suddenly, it loosened its beak and flew up the tree. Duo Kong opened his mouth and couldn't help but tremble. A beast. It was definitely a beast. It was so fierce, how could it not be? After hunting for so many years, Duo Kong had rarely seen such a small beast. There might be many in other parts of the forest, but usually, they were mostly large beasts. Some small beasts were hard to find even if they hid. So, when he saw such a small beast that seemed to be even more fierce than a normal beast, he was shocked. Of course, it wasn't called a beast based on its fierceness. It was called a beast based on its strength. All this time, Duo Kong had only seen it as a duck that ate and drank for free in the tribe. But he didn't expect. Duo Kong looked at the piranha on the ground that was so badly mutilated that it couldn't be seen. He swallowed and said to Xiao, "I think I might know why it could withstand being frozen for so many years without dying." Chapter 7:12. They knew that this pterosaur was fierce. Although they didn't know how strong it was, they had already classified it as a species that needed to be closely watched. For the next few days, Xiao would let it roam around the area and let it search for food by itself. It ate flying beetles, flying stone squirrels, and even stone worms that dug up from the ground. When it couldn't finish eating, it would grab some and hide them. This also explained why there were all kinds of insects and small animals in the ice floes. It was probably the pterosaur that had hidden them. But at that time, due to some accident, it was frozen along with its food. Of course, these few days weren't completely smooth. Sometimes, it would reveal its wild and untamed side, and even wanted to secretly fly away. This fellow was amenable to force, but not persuasion. Gentle methods couldn't teach it a lesson, so every time Xiao directly used force to suppress it. After a few times, it became much more obedient. However, another reason why it didn't run around was that it knew that it was very dangerous outside. This was no longer the world it was familiar with. The sky was no longer the pterosaur's world. It was weak alone in an unfamiliar environment. Rather than flying around randomly, it was better to stay in a place where there were same kind. At least every time it encountered danger and was attacked by other birds, it would fly back, and the patrolling Yanjiao would definitely help it deal with it. It wasn't afraid of one or two birds, but it was much more troublesome to deal with a flock of birds. It could only rely on the Yanjiao. What made Xiao curious was that this pterosaur would fight with Gigu's snow falcon every time it saw it. In terms of flying speed, it couldn't compare to the snow falcon, but its mouth was fast. When its wings couldn't keep up, it would use its mouth to peck and pull out a few feathers from the snow falcon. Of course, it was also injured. Its feathers weren't as dense as those of other birds, so the injuries were obvious, but it recovered quickly. Later, when Gigu saw that they often fought, he let the snow falcon stay on the mountain where they lived. As for this pterosaur, Xiao didn't bring it up the mountain. After all, with its wild nature, who knew when it would bite the children on the mountain? However, this pterosaur actually got along well with Cha-Cha. It would never provoke Cha-Cha. It had shown that right from the start. Perhaps it knew that it was no match for Cha-Cha, or for some other reason, but it had never offended her. Most of the time, it would even take the initiative to approach Cha-Cha, especially when it was in danger. However, at the beginning, it would often be kicked aside by Cha-Cha. If it wasn't for Xiao warning, Cha-Cha would have stomped it to death. It was so annoying. But just when Xiao thought that the pterosaur and Cha-Cha didn't get along, the two of them started to coexist peacefully. Later, Xiao found out the reason. The pterosaur was helping Cha-Cha clean the parasites on her body. It wasn't just the long-haired beasts that lived in the forest. Many birds had parasites on their bodies. Some birds would deal with them themselves. For example, they would use ants to remove the parasites on their bodies, or they would rub on the juice of plants that repelled the parasites. Sometimes, Cha-Cha would rub on trees or other plants. Xiao Xian couldn't help it with this. Xiao Xian didn't know how to concoct a repellent. If the parasites weren't removed, Cha-Cha's feathers would all fall off. Moreover, birds in their natural state always had their own ways of dealing with the parasites, so Xiao Xian didn't intervene. But now, with the pterosaur helping Cha-Cha solve this problem, it seemed to be very familiar with this kind of thing. Could it be that they also did this a long time ago? Xiao Xian didn't know the answer to this question, but it was a good thing that the two of them could get along peacefully. Later on, Cha-Cha would also share some of the prey it brought back with the pterosaur. It was like a big brother taking care of his little brother. Both of them were willing to do this. The man-made river channel was still being excavated. Xiao Xian would also help out when he was free. In the plan, this river channel had to go around the area where the king's stoneworm lived, so it was a huge project. Everyone was also paying attention to the desert, but they weren't that worried in the short term. Another reason why the people from Rock Hill City didn't come out was that the monsters they created had an effective range of control. Unless the people controlling the monsters voluntarily walked out of the desert, as long as they stayed in the desert, the puppet-like monsters wouldn't come out. In other words, as long as Rock Hill City set their sights on the sea, they wouldn't have to worry about the monsters coming out to attack people in other places. On this day, Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo were discussing the underground passage left behind by the king's stoneworm when someone came to tell them that the feather tribe had come. The chief wanted Xiao Xian to go over to discuss something. How rare, they actually came at this time. Xiao Xian rolled up the design in his hand. They had always sealed off the underground passage left behind by the king's stoneworm, including this stone forest. They wouldn't let anyone get close, so many people didn't know there was an underground passage that led to the other side of the flaming river. You go over, I'll keep an eye here. Zheng Luo took the beast skin scroll from Xiao Xian and said. He wasn't familiar with the feather tribe and wasn't interested, so there was no need for him to go over. Alright, let me know if you have any questions. Xiao Xian followed the warrior who came looking for him to the headquarters. At the same time, he asked about the feather tribe's leader and their purpose. Xiao Xian thought the leader of the feather tribe would be Gu Ji, who he knew. However, he didn't expect the warrior who came to him to say that the chief of the feather tribe would be leading the team himself. Otherwise, the chief wouldn't have asked Xiao Xian to come. Is there something urgent? Xiao Xian asked. It doesn't look like it. They didn't look like they were in a hurry, but... The warrior paused, then said, I think I heard them say they wanted to go into the forest to catch birds, to replenish their bird supply. Replenish their bird supply? Yes, I think the chief has the same idea. Grand Elder, you know we don't have many birds in our tribe. Especially after what happened to Wu He and the others, some people in Yanjiao had been thinking about whether they could strengthen their aerial defenses. Even if it was just an early warning system, there were only a limited number of watchtowers. Back then, some people suggested going to the Hui tribe to get some giant mountain eagle eggs to hatch, but more people objected. Not everyone could control a giant mountain eagle. The Hui tribe had accumulated experience over generations, and they could get along well with the giant mountain eagles. Other people might not be able to do it. Just look at Cha-Cha. It grew up in Yanjiao, but other than Xiao Xian, it didn't listen to anyone else, including old Ku. It was better to forget about such a difficult bird. Let's switch to an easier one. Now that the feather tribe was here, some people in Yanjiao began to think of a solution. The feather tribe was an expert in bird taming. They knew what birds were suitable for different purposes. The few large tribes in the central region were busy recently. The Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe had always been in an alliance. They seemed to be planning something, and the feather tribe couldn't get involved. The Hui and Tianshan tribes were in the grasslands, too far away from them. The Thousand Masks tribe was busy recruiting followers. Ever since they merged their fire seed, the Thousand Masks tribe began to protect the small and medium tribes that depended on them. With the example of failed merging, the Thousand Masks tribe's actions made the small and medium tribes feel more at ease. After the feather tribe merged their fire seed, they began to plan some things that they had always wanted to do but never realized. Their tribe hadn't replenished their bird supply for a long, long time. While Xiao Xian was heading towards the headquarters, at the foot of the mountain where the Yanjiao tribe lived, a few young people of the Feather tribe gathered together to discuss what kind of birds to catch after entering the forest. As they were talking, one of them stopped and elbowed the person next to him. "Look, what kind of bird is that?" They looked over and saw a strange-looking bird resting on a tree not far away, staring at them. Chapter 713. Is that a bird domesticated by the Yanjiao tribe? Someone was confused. I think so. I've never seen a bird like that. Maybe it was caught in the forest by the Yanjiao? Another young girl with colorful feathers guessed. No, it's not a domesticated bird. Hongxi looked at the strange bird resting on the branch and said with certainty. That's right. A slightly older young man beside Hongxi agreed. That bird is too wild. It's completely different from domesticated birds. That bird looks dangerous. Hongxi stared at the bird not far away and frowned. The people of the Feather tribe could judge the general information of the bird at a glance. Although they had never seen a bird like that before, they could make a preliminary judgment from its shape, and subtle movements. Why don't I try? A young man was eager to try. This time, they came to Yanjiao with the team to go into the more dangerous forest to catch more birds. They wanted to replenish the bird species that hadn't changed for a long time. The bird species in the tribe were still too few. Some of the new breeds were not satisfied. Moreover, there hadn't been any changes for a long time. This was not a good sign for the Feather tribe. Fortunately, the fusion of the fire seed had broken the time limit. Under the chief's order, they started to look for new bird species. For the Feather tribe, this kind of replenishment was very necessary. In the past, they would replenish their stock, but it might only be one species every few years. This time, however, the chief personally led the team and planned to catch more species of birds to bring back. This time, he brought a group of young people with great potential to train them. After all, the future of the tribe depended on these young people. The new Feather tribe would start to change with them. It had to be said that the chief of the Feather tribe had high expectations for these young people. These young people were also capable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been selected from so many people in the tribe. The young man who said he wanted to give it a try was talented in taming birds. Before he had awakened his totem power, he had begun to tame birds. Looking at the feathers on his head, one could tell what kind of birds he was taming. The colorful feathers of different lengths on his head were all proof of his ability. Therefore, he believed that even if it was the first time he met a bird, even if it was a wild bird that was difficult to tame, it would become obedient in front of him. After all, it wasn't a special bird like the giant mountain eagle. It just looked strange, so he was confident that he could handle it. Therefore, after he spoke, the others were also looking forward to it. Hongxi looked at the strange bird on the tree and did not say anything to stop it. In fact, he also wanted to give it a try, but to be on the safe side, he did not mention it quickly, so the others stood up. However, Hongxi always felt that the bird was very strange. Not only did it look strange, but it also gave him a strange feeling. He had once suffered in the hands of the Yanjiao people. As a precaution, Hongxi reminded the young man when he lifted his feet and walked over. Ming Lu, be careful. Don't be careless. Yes, I know, the young man named Ming Lu said. But even though he said so, he didn't really take it to heart. He had domesticated dozens of birds of different sizes, if not 100. He should be able to handle such a small thing. Besides, he didn't want to tame it directly. He just wanted to touch it and play with it. This was Yanjiao's territory. This could only be a bird raised by the Yanjiao people. They would not go to the extent of getting into a conflict with the Yanjiao people just to tame this bird. The young man moved step by step toward the trees. Those trees were planted here after the Yinjiao people moved here. Firstly, it was to prevent the soil from flowing away quickly. Secondly, it was also to provide a place for the Yinjiao soldiers guarding the shore to rest. After all, sometimes the sun was too strong and they didn't have a place to rest. Although they had houses, they preferred to stay under the shade of the trees. This way, they could pay attention to their surroundings. At this moment, the pterosaur was resting on one of the trees. It had been here from time to time for the past 2 days. Xiao Xian didn't allow it to go up the mountain, so it could only roam around the riverbank at the foot of the mountain. The people guarding the riverbank already knew about this strange bird. Xiao Xian called it pterosaur, so they thought that Xiao Xian named it pterosaur. Sometimes, they even called it pterosaur. At this moment, the people guarding the riverbank saw the feather tribesmen walking over. They hurried forward and asked, "What are you doing?" One of the Yinjiao soldiers wanted to stop the man who was walking towards the tree, but Hong Shi stopped him. "Don't worry, we won't do anything rash. We're just curious about the strange bird on the tree. We don't have any intention of snatching it. This young man from our tribe is just going to greet the bird. You know that the feather tribe can communicate with birds." But the Yinjiao soldier still wanted to say something, but the other feather tribesmen were impatient. Wasn't it just a bird? That bird didn't have any beautiful feathers. If you didn't look closely, you'd think it didn't have any feathers. Plus, it looked strange. If it weren't for the fact that they'd never seen this kind of bird before, they wouldn't have bothered to look at it. "No buts. Hong Shi said that we're just going to greet it. You Yinjiao are on guard against this? TSK. As long as it's a bird, we're confident that we can communicate with it," the young man from the feather tribe said proudly. They weren't confident in other things, but in this case, anyone who doubted their ability was looking down on the feather tribe. The Yinjiao soldiers who came over looked at each other. Of course, they knew that these feather tribesmen wouldn't dare do anything to offend the Yinjiao. After all, the feather tribe still needed the Yinjiao to bring them into the forest to catch birds. However, they weren't worried about the feather tribesmen doing anything to the pterosaur. On the contrary, they were worried about what the pterosaur would do to the feather tribe. But one of the Yinjiao soldiers opened his mouth. He saw the feather tribesmen's dissatisfaction, as if stopping them from communicating with the bird was looking down on the feather tribe. In the end, he swallowed his words. A Yinjiao soldier behind him pulled at his companion who wanted to say something, indicating that he shouldn't say anything. The Yinjiao soldier sighed. "Fine, don't say anything." However, he felt uncomfortable holding back his words. Seeing that the Yinjiao soldier finally stopped talking nonsense, the feather tribesmen were satisfied. They signaled the person who stopped halfway to continue. "Quick, Ming Lu, don't let it fly. I saw it flapping its wings. Don't worry, I'll definitely take it down." Ming Lu waved his hand nonchalantly and continued walking towards the bird. The closer he got, the slower his steps became. The aura around him also calmed down. The totemic power didn't appear out of nowhere. It was as if everything happened naturally. The feather tribesmen could make birds feel close to them if they wanted to. Therefore, when the feather tribesmen revealed their totemic tattoos, they didn't feel the same rush of battle as the Yinjiao soldiers. Instead, they seemed to be communicating with each other silently. The fancy totemic tattoos on their bodies were also a form of communication with the bird. It was just like how birds in nature communicated with each other not only through their voices, but also through their feathers and other actions. Courtship, defense, intimidation, or even some ordinary communication all involved this silent method of communication. A few Yinjiao soldiers looked at this scene curiously. This was the first time they saw the feather tribesmen in a non-combat state. They used their totemic power to this extent, but it wasn't for battle. It was really novel. The totemic tattoos on the surface of Ming Lu's body weren't motionless like the other tribesmen. Instead, they were constantly moving, as if following a certain set of rules, like waves. This was because Ming Lu was too young and not strong enough. After merging with the fire seed, his body hadn't completely merged with the fire seed's power. Therefore, he couldn't use this ability to its fullest potential. If Hong Shi was here, flames might even appear on the surface of his body. However, everyone, including Hong Shi, felt that Ming Lu's current state was enough. Didn't he see that the strange bird was already attracted to him? This could be considered as a successful first step. As long as he could attract the bird's attention, he would have more confidence in succeeding. If he couldn't even attract the bird's attention, he wouldn't be able to do anything else. 10 steps, 8 steps, 6 steps. Ming Lu was getting closer and closer to the tree. As he walked, other than the changes on his body, his throat was moving rapidly. The Yinjiao soldiers could hear some vague sounds, but they couldn't understand what it meant. However, it seemed like he was communicating with the bird. The Yinjiao soldiers looked at each other in surprise. Was he talking about it already? Could it be that what the feather tribesman said was true? That they could really communicate with the strange bird? But didn't the Grand Elder say that it wasn't a bird and that they should treat it like any other fearsome beast in the forest? While the Yinjiao soldiers were thinking, Ming Lu was already 3 steps away from the tree. At this moment, Ming Lu took every step very slowly. Although he was arrogant and proud, he wouldn't be careless at this moment. After all, he had to do what he had to do. When it was time to slow down, he couldn't rush. Moreover, the others and the Yinjiao soldiers were all looking at him. He couldn't afford to fail. However, the closer he got to the strange bird, the stranger Ming Lu felt. Although the strange bird on the tree kept its attention on him and wasn't scared away, he realized that the strange bird didn't react the way he expected it to. Although it didn't fly away, it didn't show any interest in getting close to him either. It maintained its previous posture. Those vertical pupils were staring at him with the same gaze. There was no change in its gaze at all. It was as if all his previous actions were useless. How could this be? It shouldn't be. Ming Lu was puzzled. He was confident and didn't suspect anything else. He was just wondering if this bird was retarded. As long as it was a bird, after all he had done, it should have some other reaction, right? Even if it refused to communicate with him, it should have some reaction. However, this strange bird maintained its initial posture. Those eyes made Ming Lu feel inexplicably uneasy. Should I dance? Ming Lu thought. In the feather tribesmen, dancing with birds was a common thing. It was also a way to improve communication. Of course, to others, it looked like dancing. In fact, it was just a mimicry of the bird's behavior. Just as Ming Lu was thinking about dancing, Hong Shi, who had been staring at the strange bird on the tree, suddenly shouted, "Ming Lu, be careful." Ah, a blood-curdling scream came from the foot of the mountain where Yanjiao lived. Many people on the mountain looked down. That scream didn't sound like someone from their tribe. When the other feather tribesmen in the Yanjiao tribe heard that scream, they thought that the Yanjiao people had attacked. Even the chief of the feather tribe, who was chatting with Gigu, stood up from his wooden chair. With his hearing, he could hear the sounds at the foot of the mountain even if he was on the mountain. Ming Lu's scream was too loud. The feather tribesman could tell from his voice that Ming Lu must have been injured. That was why he couldn't help but scream. In Yinjiao territory, only the Yinjiao people could hurt the feather tribesman. In an instant, the feather tribesmen's expressions changed. They hurried down the mountain. Gigu and the rest didn't know what had happened. However, if the Yinjiao people really hurt the feather tribesmen, they would naturally protect their own people. So what if they were in the wrong? If they wanted to reprimand them, they had to wait until there was no one else around. In front of outsiders, as long as it wasn't a serious matter, the Yinjiao people would take care of it for them. This was what the tribe did all the time. When Xiao Xian returned, he saw a group of people running in that direction. He heard the screams too. However, compared to the others, he knew better than anyone else what had happened. That was why he wasn't in a hurry. At the foot of the mountain, beside the flaming river, a group of people had gathered there. The feather tribesmen with feathers on their heads were all gathered there, asking questions about what had happened. From the looks of it, if it was proven that the Yinjiao people did it, there would be a fight. However, Hong Shi and the rest looked very embarrassed. Their faces were red, but they didn't say anything. It was the Yinjiao warriors guarding the river that told Gigu and the rest about the cause of this incident and the current outcome. After listening to the explanation, Gigu acted as if he didn't see the feather tribesmen's reactions. Instead, he asked the Yinjiao warriors, "Didn't you warn them?" "We did, but they didn't listen. Moreover, they interrupted me before I could finish my sentence." The Yinjiao warrior who couldn't finish his sentence looked aggrieved. He really felt aggrieved. His OCD was acting up. Was it easy for him to hold it in until now? The feather tribesmen said that they were just greeting the strange bird and didn't let us stop them. However, didn't the Grand Elder say that the strange bird wasn't a bird? The feather tribesman, Ming Lu, whose hand was bitten, was speechless. "Why didn't you say it wasn't a bird earlier?" Xiao Xian, who was walking over, pursed his lips. "If a peacock fanned its tail, it would be fine if you fanned it at a peacock. What was the point of fanning it at a lizard? It would think that you were provoking it. Wasn't that courting death?" Chapter 7:14. He thought the Yinjiao people had gone too far, but he didn't expect his tribesmen to be so reckless. The chief of the feather tribe felt embarrassed. He knew they couldn't blame the Yinjiao people for this. Judging from Hong Shi and the others' reactions, he knew the Yinjiao people were telling the truth. They weren't exaggerating. Why didn't they finish listening to him? On second thought, the feather tribesmen felt that the Yinjiao people were really scheming. They were just waiting to laugh at them. He looked at the wound on Ming Lu's hand. It wasn't serious, but it looked scary. However, if Ming Lu hadn't reacted quickly and the strange bird hadn't flown a little slower, Ming Lu's hand would have been bitten off a huge chunk of flesh. Since nothing serious happened, the chief of the feather tribe calmed himself down. He forced a smile and said to Gigu, "Let's continue what we were talking about. Xiao Xian is here too. Let's talk about going into the forest. You guys go up first, I'll catch up later," said Xiao Xian. The pterosaur that bit Ming Lu had already swam to the surface of the flaming river. However, it didn't dive into the water. Instead, it swam on the surface like a duck. The only difference was that it bent its wings like it was crawling on the ground. At the same time, it stood up like a sail and used the wind to push it forward. It didn't stray too far from the shore. At least there weren't any ferocious fish that it couldn't handle. If anything happened, the Yinjiao people would help. If it strayed too far away, it would be dangerous. Xiao Xian whistled. The pterosaur that was swimming on the surface of the river immediately flew over. The feather tribesmen had strange expressions on their faces when they saw this. Was this really not a bird? It looked like a bird, but it didn't care about their methods at all. The Yinjiao people whistled and ran over. Judging by the way they flapped their wings, it was as if they were afraid something would happen if they were too slow. The feather tribesmen were right. The pterosaur was afraid that it would be suppressed if it was too slow, so when it heard Xiao Xian's whistle, it didn't dare to delay. Xiao Xian held a wing in each hand and looked at it. He didn't find any injuries on the pterosaur's body, so he let go. "Go play by yourself. Don't run too far." The pterosaur cried out, flapped its wings, and flew back into the river. It dove into the water to vent its anger on the fish. Xiao Xian didn't stay long at the foot of the mountain. After all, the people on the mountain were still waiting for him. After Xiao Xian left, the young men of the feather tribe breathed a sigh of relief. They actually wanted to ask Xiao Xian about the strange bird, but they were too embarrassed to do so. After all, they had just made a fool of themselves, and Xiao Xian was in a hurry to go up the mountain, so they didn't have the chance to ask. "Look over there." Someone pointed at a certain spot on the flaming river. The water there was churning, and there was also the color of blood. That seems to be the place where the strange bird went down. Aren't there many dangerous fish in this river? Won't it be fine if it goes down? It should be fine. Don't you see that the Yanjiao people aren't worried? Everyone looked over. As expected, the Yanjiao people guarding the flaming river only glanced in that direction. They were very calm, as if they were already used to this scene. Not long after, the strange bird flew out of the water with half a fish in its mouth. The fish was already incomplete, but even so, the incomplete half was still bigger than the strange bird. It could easily fly with the fish in its mouth. Looking at its teeth, they were like hooks. Even if it was just scratched, it would not feel good. Seeing the strange bird fly up the tree and eat the fish, Hongxi was instantly relieved. Luckily, he didn't act rashly. Otherwise, the one injured wouldn't be Ming Lu, but him. Actually, what Hongxi didn't know was that if he really did attack, he might not have been injured. Hongxi's fusion level with the fire seed was much higher than Ming Lu's. When he used his totemic power, the fire seed might appear. The pterosaur was very afraid of that. Its first reaction would be to run, let alone attack. However, this topic didn't last long. The young people started complaining about feathers being used as currency. The Flaming River trading point didn't accept feathers. Why couldn't feathers be used as a currency? Especially those beautiful and rare feathers. Weren't they precious? Why didn't everyone like them? The feather tribesmen had always complained about this. At least within their tribe, it was common to exchange feathers for things. However, outside the tribe, this method was not accepted. After all, not everyone had a special liking for birds. In the feather tribe, they needed feathers for power, weddings, and even some important ceremonies. Feathers could be used as decorations and currency in the feather tribe. Another reason why they tamed birds was to satisfy their need for feathers. The feather tribe had a strong desire for beautiful feathers. Most of the birds they raised were birds with beautiful feathers, except for those that were used for special purposes. Beautiful feathers can brighten up their mood. Unfortunately, other tribes didn't have this hobby. Even though the feather tribe had always wanted feathers as a currency, they had never succeeded. However, if Xiao Xian was here, he would definitely recommend them to use this method on the slave masters on the other side of the sea. Especially those who called themselves nobles. They liked beautiful and rare things. What the feather tribe couldn't do here, they might succeed on the other side of the sea. On the mountain, Gigu, Xiao Xian and the feather tribesmen were discussing about entering the forest. This time, Xiao Xian didn't need to bring them. Ta was going to bring some people to hunt, so he would be in charge of this. Of course, they wouldn't bring the feather tribesmen to all their hunting routes. They only chose a route with the most birds. Ta would bring the feather tribesmen there. There were many beautiful birds that the flaming horns were not interested in. They never looked at birds that were small in size and had little meat. However, the feather tribe was interested in these birds. They would catch some birds and bring them back to expand their breeding range to supplement their tribe's bird species. At the same time, the feather tribesmen also agreed to help the Yanjiao find some birds that met their requirements. They didn't have to be big, and their tempers weren't too bad either. Otherwise, if they fought all the time in the tribe, how could they survive? They didn't need cha-cha birds either. Yanjiao couldn't raise giant mountain eagles. Snow falcons were rare and couldn't be raised on a large scale. The birds they needed to be vigilant and strong. The Yanjiao looked down on those that were too weak. They needed to be smart. Those that were too slow were useless. They also didn't need birds that could jump up and down every day. Ta heard a lot about this from the feather tribesmen. They didn't need birds to dance with them every day. How could they have the time to dance with them? They didn't care about their appearance or their voice. As long as they met their requirements, even if they looked like a toad, the Yanjiao would still accept them. The Yanjiao had a lot of requirements, but since they agreed to help the Yanjiao find birds, they would keep their promise unless they couldn't find any suitable ones. After the discussion, Ta led the hunting team and the feather tribesmen into the forest. 20 days later. Xiao Xian was drawing blood from the green-faced fanged beasts. These beasts had gotten fat recently and seemed to be getting used to the life of eating and sleeping. They didn't want to go out. A Yinjiao warrior hurried over. "Head elder, the chief wants you to go over. He said Ta and the others are back." "They're back?" Xiao Xian finished drawing blood from the remaining beasts and sent the blood to the casting room. Then he went to the Yinjiao residence. He didn't know what kind of birds Ta brought back. Chapter 7:15. When Xiao Xian arrived, he saw a group of people gathered at the foot of the mountain where they lived. They didn't go up the mountain because it was more spacious. Besides, the birds they brought back still needed to be processed. It was too noisy to bring them up the mountain. Before Xiao Xian even got close, he could already hear the sounds of birds chirping. The Feather Tribe's iconic feathered costumes could be seen from afar. Many Feather Tribesmen held birdcages of various sizes in their hands. They were made of rattan or straw. Different species of birds had different cages, and the shapes of the cages were also different. This was the first time the Yinjiao people had seen so many different kinds of birdcages. It was undeniable that the Feather Tribesmen cared a lot about appearances. Their cages were even decorated and looked very flashy. "They're all back?" Xiao Xian asked a warrior who was craning his neck to look inside. "Yes, team leader Ta and the rest are back. However, they only brought back bird eggs, unlike the Feather Tribesmen who brought back adult birds." Xiao Xian nodded. "Yes, team leader Ta and the rest are back. However, they only brought back bird eggs, unlike the Feather Tribesmen." "They only brought back eggs? Were they planning to hatch the eggs themselves?" Because they saw Xiao Xian coming over, the people crowded there all made a path for him. Xiao Xian saw the Feather Tribesmen showing off the birds they caught. Some of them were released directly, probably because they had already started taming them. Most of them were just showing off their cages. The birds the Feather Tribe caught all had beautiful feathers. They either had gorgeous tail feathers, strange crests, or special feathers on other parts of their bodies. As soon as he saw the birds the Feather Tribesmen brought back, Xiao Xian was worried that they would recommend flashy but impractical birds to Ta. Although they had said before that they didn't care about appearance, only practicality, no one could be sure until they saw the results. Without looking at the birds the Feather Tribesmen brought back, Xiao Xian went straight to Ta. Gigu and the others were already there, standing there and listening to Tower. The people of the Feather Tribe said that the withered leaf birds are active in both day and night, especially at dawn and dusk. They're more active at night than during the day. I think we need to take precautions at night. After all, there aren't many people now, so there's a lot of restrictions at night. If possible, let's try taming these withered leaf birds. Ta held an animal skin scroll in his hand. Xiao Xian went over to take a look. There was a painting on it. It should have been drawn by the Feather Tribesmen. Although the painting was still abstract, the main features of the painting could be seen at a glance. Seeing Xiao Xian coming over, Ta directly handed over the animal skin scroll in his hand to let Xiao Xian have a good look. After all, Xiao Xian was only one of the main decision-makers whether or not these withered leaf bird eggs could be kept. "Why are they called withered leaf birds?" Xiao Xian asked. This name must have been given by the Feather Tribesmen. They said that these birds look like a pile of withered leaves, and when they hatch, they bury the eggs in the withered leaves. Ta didn't remember the exact words of the Feather Tribesmen, so he only gave a rough description. Although it wasn't complete, Xiao Xian understood. Generally speaking, the Feather Tribesmen gave the withered leaf birds this name because of the color of their feathers and the way they hatched. Compared to other birds, withered leaf birds' hatching method was less common. It was more similar to the way reptiles hatch. They would bury their eggs in pre-prepared soil bags. There were withered leaves and branches in the bags. When the leaves were fermented, they would generate heat. The withered leaf birds used the heat from the fermentation to hatch their eggs. Being able to adapt to this method and having a high hatching rate, at least these birds weren't stupid. This made the Yinjiao people a little satisfied. As long as they weren't stupid, they didn't mind at all if they were ugly. Xiao Xian looked at the drawing on the animal skin roll. There were a few concentric circles around the bird's eyes. It looked like a radar. What's that on its head? It stood up like an antenna. The withered leaf bird in the drawing had a long, thin feather on its head. It was more than half the length of its body. Oh, that's the crest of the withered leaf bird. The feathered tribesmen didn't like this kind of crest, so they didn't raise them again except for a few hundred years ago. However, they said that these birds are very vigilant. When they sense danger, the crest on their heads will stand up. Also, withered leaf birds have many kinds of calls. They make different calls under different circumstances. It's easy to distinguish them, and they're not suitable for long-distance flight. They only move around in one place, so you don't have to worry about them flying away. So the feather tribesman suggested that we raise withered leaf birds. I think we can give it a try. Ta repeated what the feather tribesman said. He wasn't easily fooled by the feather tribesman, but he agreed with the feather tribesman's reasoning. Why don't the feather tribesmen raise them? Is it really just because they don't look good? Someone asked. Not really, Ta continued. The feather tribesman said that withered leaf birds are noisy. It's not that they're noisy, it's just that they tend to quarrel with other birds. So once they start quarreling, the feather tribesmen will be in a state of chaos. The feather tribesmen raised so many birds. Imagine if all of them started chirping. We don't have any other birds in our tribe, right? Guihe and Cha-Cha definitely won't quarrel with them. That group of ducks basically won't leave the vicinity of the lake now. If we domesticate withered leaf birds, it should be possible. Yeah, we can give it a try. By the way, how big can withered leaf birds grow? Xiao Xian asked. Not big, just this small. Ta gestured with his hand. It was only about 2 palms long, smaller than those ducks. However, he heard that withered leaf birds lived in flocks. Ta brought back 40 to 50 eggs. Even if only half of them hatched, it was enough. They could give it a try. They weren't big, so they couldn't carry people. It was a bit of a pity. However, if withered leaf birds were really like what the feather tribesman said, everyone would be satisfied. Hopefully, they could be useful when there weren't many people around. I talked to the feather tribesmen and asked them to leave a few people behind to help us hatch the eggs. After all, they have experience. I heard that even if they bury the eggs, they still have to look after them every day. It's better to leave them to them. In fact, these eggs were dug out from the mounds that were buried with dead branches and leaves. They didn't all come from the same mound, but from several mounds. 5 to 10 eggs were taken from each mound. If the feather tribesmen didn't have their own skills to protect the eggs, none of these eggs would have hatched. They said that they'll hatch in 10 days. Since the feather tribesmen needed to look after the eggs hatched, and the feather tribesmen needed a few days, they stayed here to observe the adaptation of the birds. So they didn't leave for the time being. After more than 40 withered leaf bird eggs hatched, the feather tribesmen left. Withered leaf bird chicks were birds that matured early. They could walk and look for food as soon as they hatched, saving a lot of effort. This was one of the reasons why Ta chose them. A person with rich experience in rearing was chosen from the animal pen to take care of these newly hatched withered leaf birds. Because the breeder was the one who saw them the most after they hatched and also fed them, these fledglings were very dependent on the breeder. Sometimes, they would line up and follow the breeder. When Xiao Xian arrived, he saw the 42 gray-brown fluffy birds following the breeder to the food trough. They probably hadn't hatched for long. Although they could walk, they couldn't fly yet. Why do they look so tired? Xiao Xian asked. The chicks' eyes were half open, and they staggered as they walked. They looked like they hadn't woken up yet. The breeder smiled and explained, "No, they're usually like this. But when they eat, they look more energetic." Sure enough, as soon as they arrived at the food trough, the chicks, who looked like they hadn't woken up yet, started fighting over the food. Seeing these chicks grow so energetic from their fragile state, the breeder was very proud. The feather tribesman also taught him how to mix the food. Sure enough, these withered leaf birds grew well. But this breeder didn't get to be proud for more than 2 days before the chicks abandoned him. The reason was that the pterosaur threw half a fish into the flock. At first, the breeder was worried that these birds wouldn't get used to it. He didn't expect these birds to be so adaptable. Not only that, but the pterosaur also threw in some small animals. Every time it threw in food, it would lie down and watch. Later, these chicks became closer to the pterosaur and no longer followed the breeder. However, when the tribesmen saw that these birds didn't have any problems and were even more active, they didn't care. They even thought that it would be great if these birds could learn some commands from the pterosaur. After all, the feather tribesmen wouldn't teach them how to tame birds. They had to think of their own ways. Unfortunately, these birds weren't suitable for engraving. That was why the Yinjiao people thought that it would be better to take it slow. When these birds grew up, they might be able to understand some commands. However, Xiao Xian felt that the pterosaur had other intentions. The reason why the pterosaur was so daring was because Xiao Xian didn't have the time to keep an eye on it. The man-made river channel at the Flaming River trading point was almost completed. The bridge that needed to be built was also built. Zheng Luo had been discussing with him about the sluice gates. They would build 2 sluice gates at the 2 crossings of the river channel and the Flaming River. The main purpose was to stop dangerous fish and river beasts from entering the river. The completion of the man-made river channel meant that the river wouldn't be blocked by the Flaming River Bridge anymore. Ships could use the man-made river channel to bypass the stone bridge. However, they had to pass under the watchful eyes of the Yinjiao people. They couldn't avoid Yinjiao's eyes. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.